He woke up face down in the snow, his hands bound, inside the body of a disgraced clerk who had been exiled to die. A foreign world, strange hands. A stranger's wife waits in a cold shack, and the village of 312 souls is slowly dying out because they smoke meat until it becomes poison. And he alone in the world knows how to fix it. The cold burns his skin so badly that his body twitches on its own. Han Do-yoon opens his eyes and sees nothing but white. Snow fills his mouth and nostrils. He pushes himself up with his hands, but his wrists are bound with a wet rope. His fingers won't obey him. He loosens the knot with his teeth in half a minute and looks at his hands. Thin, not his own, without calluses from knives. No burn on his left thumb, the one he got during his internship in Salamanca when he dropped a thermometer into a vat of hot brine. These aren't his hands. He lifts his head. Before him is a crooked gate. Beyond it, sagging roofs. A sour smell wafts through the cracks. That's how meat smells when it's been rotting for 2 days without refrigeration. A girl of about 8 stands by the gate. Her face is gray. Her cheekbones stick out. Her eyes are large but not childlike. She's chewing on a piece of bark and looking at Do-yoon as if he were an object that's about to break. He stares, not at her, but at the bark. The cambium has been completely stripped away. Only the inner bark remains. Tannins, bitterness, zero protein, pure cellulose. The body expends more energy on this than it gains. This isn't food. It's a simulation of chewing so the brain doesn't go mad from hunger. They're eating wood. Behind the girl, a squirrel carcass hangs over the smoldering fire. It's blackened on the outside, raw on the inside. Its belly has already turned green. Clostridia. In a day or two, whoever eats it will get poison instead of food. They're smoking it wrong. Hot smoke seals the outer layer, and moisture remains inside. Bacteria multiply inside it as if in an incubator. Their food kills them faster than starvation. Do-yoon stands up. His legs give way, and he falls to one knee. His body is emaciated. He hasn't been fed in a long time. He stands up again and parts his cracked lips. You already have a cold chain. Winter, -20, a natural refrigerator for 8 months. All that's left is to teach you everything else. The girl blinks. She turns away. She walks off. She didn't understand a single word, and that's normal. Beyond the gates stretches the only street in the village of Solgok. 312 souls, a penal colony beyond the ridge of 1,000 wolves. This is where they send those the capital wants to forget. Most don't live to see spring. Do-yoon walks and counts. 2 10-1 houses. 4 are boarded up. Only 11 chimneys are smoking. That means 6 houses have nothing to burn or no one to tend the fire. People don't stop. A woman turns away. An old man spits into the snow. A boy with a stick darts into an alley. Exiles were often seen here. No one asks who he is. The last house stands off to the side. The north wall has sagged. The roof is patched with birch bark. The door is open. Inside, it's dark and cold. The hearth went out long ago. From the darkness behind a chest, a woman rises and steps back toward the wall. Young, thin, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes. Her fingers are clasped in front of her. She looks at the stranger in her house, wary, without hostility, but without a single spark of warmth. Do-yoon realizes this is the wife of that quiet clerk whose body he has taken over. She speaks first, quietly, calmly. He's been gone for 3 days. The escort left him at the gate that morning, but he was lying in the snow and wouldn't move. She didn't go after him because she thought he was dead. Many die that way. They lie down and don't get up. Do-yoon nods. Then he asks one thing. Is there any salt in the house? She looks at him for a long time. She pulls a rag from behind the chest, unfolds it. A handful of coarse gray salt, 50 grams. He takes a pinch and puts it on his tongue. Impurities. 30% of it isn't salt, but soil minerals, but the base is sound. This will be enough. He wraps the salt back up. For the first time, something flickers in the woman's eyes. Not warmth, not hope, a question. The former owner of this body never once asked about the salt in 3 years. Do-yoon doesn't explain. He steps out onto the threshold. The cold hits his face. Before him, a dark pine forest stretches up the slope toward the ridge. Somewhere out there, animals roam. Deer, roe deer, wild boars, hares. All this biomass moves along trails that have been formed over millennia. The trails don't disappear. They shift. If the village is starving, it means the people have lost the trails. It's not that the animals have left. The people have stopped seeing. Do-yoon takes his first step from the threshold. The snow crunches under his foot. His body is weak and empty. His head is spinning. But his hands remember. Not these hands. Those. The hands that for 10 years cut meat, weighed salt, calculated drying times, and knew by the smell when the sausage was ready. Those hands are gone. But the memory lives on in them now. Here. In this gaunt body. In this alien world. In this village where children eat tree bark. Do-yoon heads toward the forest. He doesn't make it. Halfway there, his legs give out, and he sits down in the snow at the edge of the last vegetable garden. Beneath the mitt he no longer has, he clenches a handful of snow and holds it until the cold seeps to his bones. It brings his head back to its senses. He isn't thinking about how to get meat. He's thinking that there's already meat in the settlement. Squirrels on the campfires. Carcasses hidden somewhere under the snow. Snares. People haven't forgotten how to hunt. They've forgotten how to preserve. Between the catch and the meal lies decay. That's where the leak is. That's where he's needed. He returns to the house. A woman sits by the extinguished hearth, mending a tear in her boot with a bone needle. She doesn't look up. Do-yoon sits down across from her and looks at her closely for the first time. She carries herself the way a person does who has long lived alongside someone they're afraid of losing, and is afraid because nothing depends on them. Patient resignation. He'd seen that look on the faces of people working at a factory about to close, knowing they had only 2 months' pay left. "What's your name?" he asks. She freezes with the needle suspended in the air. She replies, "So-rin." And she adds more quietly, "You forgot." He doesn't say that he forgot. He says he wants to start over. It's true, though not the truth she's thinking of. Night falls early. So-rin builds a tiny fire from 3 logs and heats water in a clay pot. A handful of millet and scraps of dried greens float in the water. That's their entire dinner for 2. Do-yoon eats slowly. His body craves more, but there is no more. He sets down his spoon sooner than he'd like and pushes the pot toward her. She looks at him as if he's done something incomprehensible. The former owner of this body apparently wasn't one to share. In the morning, Do-yoon is the first to get up. He finds an old knife with a chipped blade in the yard and sharpens it on a stone. His hands remember the motion, even though his wrist is weak. He walks down the street and stops at a house where a squirrel is smoking over a fire. There's an old woman with a face like bark. Next to her is a boy of about 10. Do-yoon introduces himself not with words, but with action. He points to their smokehouse, a crooked shed made of poles, beneath which a hare's carcass is turning black in the smoke. "This is killing you," he says. The old woman squints. The boy jumps to his feet. "We smoke meat the way our grandfathers did. Who is this exile to meddle?" Do-yoon doesn't argue. He takes the hare from the smoke. He cuts open its belly with a chipped knife. A sweetish rot wafts from inside. The meat near the bone is gray and damp. He holds it up to the old woman's face. She recoils. It's done on the outside, raw on the inside. Warmth and moisture. "Here," he says, poking the knife into the gray flesh, "is where what will bring a person down in a day is born. Diarrhea, fever, weakness. Many of you die not from hunger, but from your own food." The old woman is silent. The boy stares at the slit carcass. He's seen this before. He's seen people die after eating something like this. Do-yoon can read it on his face. "I'll show you how it's done," says Do-yoon. "Not for a fee. I'll just show you. If it doesn't work out, you'll lose nothing except 1 hair, which you can't eat anyway." The old woman thinks for a long time, then she nods to the boy. He brings a second hare, still raw, hunted with great effort at dawn. Do-yoon works slowly because his body is weak and the cold is making his fingers stiff. He doesn't seal the meat with hot smoke. First, he slices it thinly along the grain so the moisture can escape. Then he asks for salt. The old woman gives it to him reluctantly. He rubs the salt into the meat on all sides and explains aloud, even though they don't fully understand him. Salt draws out the water. Rot doesn't thrive in dry meat. Salt and cold. Two guardians. Nothing else is needed. He makes the smoke differently, not hot and suffocating, but barely warm. He moves the meat farther away from the coals and places a slab of bark between it and the fire so that smoke passes through, but not the heat. Cold smoking, he says to himself in Korean, a language that doesn't exist here, a language that no one else speaks anymore. The old woman hears unfamiliar words and crosses herself in her own way, warding off spirits. It takes a long time, says Do-yoon. Not just one day, but in the end, the meat will be ready to last until spring without spoiling. He doesn't leave. He sits by their fire all day, maintaining a steady, faint smoke and adjusting the slabs of meat. So-rin arrives around noon to bring him some hot water. She says nothing. She simply sets the pot down nearby and stands there, watching what he's doing. In her eyes is the same question she had when the salt was used, but now it's even stronger. By evening, 3 more people gather around the fire: a neighbor, his wife, and the old man who used to spit into the snow. They stand at a distance and watch. No one believes it, but no one leaves. Hunger is stronger than disbelief. Hunger compels them to watch. On the 3rd day, the meat is ready. Do-yoon removes the slab from the smoke and cuts it crosswise. The cut surface is dry, firm, and dark red. There's no rot. The smell is clean and salty, with a hint of smoke. He cuts off a piece and eats it himself first, in front of everyone. He chews for a long time. He swallows. He waits. Nothing. It's a taste these people have never experienced, perhaps never will. The taste of meat that isn't poison. He holds out a second piece to the boy. The boy looks at the old woman. The old woman nods. The boy takes it, chews, and freezes with his mouth full. You can tell by his expression that he doesn't understand how this could be possible. He's used to meat being either rotten or dry and bitter. But this is something else entirely. The old woman is the last to try it. She chews with her toothless mouth and remains silent for a long time. Then she says a single word that Do-yoon doesn't understand, but the meaning is clear from the way her voice trembles. It is a word of gratitude that people haven't spoken in so long that they've forgotten how. The news spreads through the village faster than the wind. The next morning, there's a line outside the old woman's house. People are bringing whatever they have: game from the forest, half-frozen fish from under the ice, someone dragged over the leg of a fallen horse. Do-yoon looks at all this and realizes he can't handle it alone. He can't process 40 carcasses with hands that can barely hold a knife. So he stops working and begins to teach. He gathers a dozen teenagers and elderly people around the fire, those who still have the strength to hold a tool and the patience to listen. He shows them how to layer the meat, how to salt it, where to direct the smoke, where to direct the heat. He draws curves in the snow with a stick, the thickness of the layer, the time, how much salt for how much meat. He doesn't know their measurements, and they don't his, but meat is the same everywhere. There's only one rule: salt draws out water. Rot can't survive in dryness. So, Rin stands among the students. She picks things up faster than anyone else. Her hands are precise, and her memory is sharp. By the end of the first day, she's layering the meat just as well as he is. By the end of the 3rd day, she's already correcting her neighbor, who's putting in too much salt. Do-yoon looks at her, and for the first time since he's been in this body, feels something resembling warmth. Not toward her personally, not yet. Toward the fact that things are moving forward. Toward the fact that the knowledge that died along with those hands now lives on in someone else's. That evening, So-rin speaks to him first for the first time, not answering, but asking, "How do you know that? You didn't know anything before. You sat poring over papers, and you were exiled because of those papers. You couldn't tell salt from ash." Do-yoon remains silent. He can't tell the truth. The truth is that he died in another world, standing at the stove in his own kitchen, and woke up here. The truth is that the man she knew is no longer here and hasn't been for 3 days. He says something else. It's also the truth, but a different one. "A person changes when they see children eating bark," he says. "I saw it, and I remembered what I didn't want to remember before." She doesn't quite believe him. He can tell, but she doesn't press him. She accepts it as one accepts an unexpected gift, without asking where it came from, for fear of scaring him away. A week passes. Meat is now drying and smoking properly over the village fires. The stench of rot above the street is fading. The children stop chewing on bark because they have something to truly fill their bellies with. Do-yoon notices that the girl who met him at the gate is now chewing on a strip of dried hair rather than bark. She doesn't recognize him. To her, he's just a stranger who has come along, and for some reason, everything has become a little less frightening. But Do-yoon isn't reassured. He knows the math. The supply of game caught in snares won't be enough for 312 people until spring. The dried meat in the settlement will last maybe a month if divided fairly. And there are 4 months until the warm weather returns. The salt is running out. Without salt, his entire method falls apart. The cold will preserve the meat, but without salt, it won't reach the state where it keeps for a long time and doesn't make people sick. Salt is what everything hinges on. He goes to see the village elder. The elder is a gaunt, one-eyed old man who rules the village by virtue of having lived longer than anyone else. He greets Do-yoon without joy, a stranger who stirs up trouble, who has gathered people around him. The village elder has seen such people before. They always ended up badly. "We need salt," says Do-yoon. "Without it, the village won't survive until spring, even now that the meat isn't rotting. Where can we get it?" The village elder looks at him with his one eye. Salt is brought once a year by a caravan that transports exiles. The caravan came in the fall. The next one won't come for another year. Until then, we'll have to make do with what we have, and there isn't much. Do-yoon thinks. Salt doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's mined. From the sea, by evaporating water. From the ground, where it lies in layers. From springs, where it flows in dissolved form. He asks if there is any salty water nearby, springs where the water tastes bitter, places where livestock lick the ground. The village elder takes a long time to answer. Then he says there is. Beyond the ridge, a day's journey away, there is a place where a bitter spring gushes from beneath a rock. Animals go there to lick the stones. People do not go there. The wind howls there, and those who venture there disappear. An evil place. By now, Yoon understands what an evil place means. It means that beasts lead the way there, along trails that people have lost. It means there's salt there, and it means he'll have to go there. He doesn't go right away. His body is still weak. First, he sets to work on whatever is at hand. In the village, it's not just carcasses that are rotting. Everything is rotting. They catch fish under the ice and pile them up in the porches, where they freeze solid and then thaw again against the warm wall, spoiling. Do-yoon shows how to keep them all in the cold at a single temperature so the ice doesn't melt. Cabbage and turnips are stored in pits that freeze all the way through, turning the vegetables into mush. He orders them to dig the pits deeper and line them with straw so the cold reaches the produce but doesn't kill it. Small things, but it's the little things that determine whether the village will be alive in the spring or not. The village headman comes himself on the 3rd day. He stands silently by the fire and watches as Do-yoon teaches. Then he says he was wrong to have thought of him as a troublemaker. He's seen many outsiders. Not a single one ever gave anything. They all just took. This one gives. The village elder is old and one-eyed, but he's not stupid. He gives Do-yun the last of the community's salt supply, every last grain. Take it. If you know how to make more of it, take everything we have now. This is what settles the matter of the trip to the spring. Without that salt, Do-yun wouldn't have risked spending his remaining supplies on an experiment. Now he has enough to make his first attempt. He nourishes his body for 2 weeks with the very meat he learned to prepare. His strength returns slowly but surely. His hands grow stronger. His wrists stop trembling when he holds a knife. So-rin feeds him in silence and no longer gives him her share. She eats it herself because he told her to. There's a little more food in the village now, so they can both eat. One night, she lies down closer to him than before. Not right up against him, but closer. The cold draws them together under a single blanket, and she doesn't pull away. Do-yun lies awake, listening to her breathing and thinking about how he has taken over someone else's life, someone else's body, someone else's wife. That the man who was supposed to be lying here next to her is dead, and she doesn't know it. It weighs heavily on him. But he can't change anything. He can only try not to be worse than the man who was here before. And it seems he's already succeeding. Once his body has regained its strength, Do-yun sets out on his journey. He takes 3 people with him. The boy who was the first to taste real meat, the young hunter who knows the forest better than anyone, and So-rin, whom he didn't invite, but who set out on her own and whom he couldn't dissuade. She said only that if he doesn't return, she wants to know why, and not have to guess like she did for 3 days while he lay in the snow. They head toward the ridge, following the beast's tracks. Do-yun reads the trail just as he once read the crooked driftwood. Where a deer has passed, a man will follow. Where the tracks converge, there is water or salt or shelter. An animal doesn't lie. An animal goes where it needs to go to survive. And it leads to salt for those who know how to look. At the pass, they're met by a wind that knocks them off their feet. Snow is blowing horizontally. A young boy sinks waist-deep into the snowdrift, and the 4 of them pull him out. The young hunter wants to turn back. But he doesn't turn back until they reach Yun. He smells it. A faint, bitter mineral scent that cannot be mistaken for anything else. The scent of salt in water. They are close. Beyond the pass, the slope descends into a ravine sheltered from the wind by cliffs. And there, from beneath a black rock, a spring gushes forth. One that does not freeze in the cold because the water is too salty to freeze. Around the spring, the ground has been trampled by hooves. The stones are polished to a shine. All the animal trails of the ridge converge here. Here is the salt. Do-yun drops to his knees and tastes the water. Bitter, pungent, rich. He closes his eyes and counts in his head. If this water is boiled down over a low flame, the salt will settle at the bottom. There's firewood. They'll bring cauldrons. It's far, but it can be carried. It's salvation stretched out over time, but salvation nonetheless. He stands up and turns to his people. So-rin looks at him and at the spring and understands before he speaks. She understands what this means, that the village will live on. It's salt, Do-yun says simply. There's enough for everyone, forever. The young hunter laughs for the first time on the entire journey. The boy scoops up water with his palm and immediately spits it out, grimacing, and laughs too. So-rin doesn't laugh. She looks at Do-yun with that gaze in which there is no longer any question. The question is gone. Something else remains, something she doesn't yet know the name of, but which warms her more than the fire. They return to Solgok by nightfall the next day. Do-yun walks ahead, followed by 3 people who have seen the salt and know the way. Tomorrow they'll bring others here. They'll set up the cauldrons. They'll begin the evaporation process. The village that had been slowly dying out will live again. Not because a savior has arrived, but because one person finally saw what had always been right before their eyes. The cold that preserves, the salt that guards, the trails that lead. All of this was here. The only thing missing was someone who knew how to look. At the threshold of the house, So Rin stops him by the sleeve. For the first time, she touches him herself. She doesn't say thank you, she says something else. I don't know who you are now, she says quietly, but you're not the one who left, and I'm glad it's you who came back, not him. Do-yoon is silent. He realizes that she understood more than she said. Maybe not everything, but enough. He covers her hand with his own, a stranger's hand, without calluses or burns, a hand that has learned to do what those other hands used to do. And for the first time since he woke up in the snow, he feels that this body is gradually becoming his own, that this world is gradually becoming his own, that this village, where the children no longer eat tree bark, is gradually becoming home. He opens the door. It's dark inside, but not cold. So Rin had stoked the hearth earlier that day. Strips of meat are drying on the wall. In the corner stands a small bag containing the first salt he'd evaporated from the sample brought back from the key. There will be more tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, there will be even more. Winter is long, but now it has an end. Do-yoon enters and closes the door behind him, shutting out the cold and the wind. Outside, above the village of Solgok, smoke rises from 11 chimneys. And soon there will be more. Soon they'll light fires in the homes that had nothing before. Soon those who were bedridden will regain their strength. Soon spring will come. And when the convoy arrives a year from now, bringing new exiles to die, it will find not a village that has died out, but one that is alive, with salt, with meat, with children who aren't chewing on tree bark. And no one will remember the quiet clerk who was exiled for his paperwork. They will remember the stranger who came out of the snow with his hands bound and taught them how to see. Do-yoon lies down next to So-rin under a single blanket. His body is tired, but satisfied. His hands are strong. His mind is clear. He falls asleep quickly and without dreams, and in the morning he'll be the first to rise, just as he has every morning. And he'll go to work. Because the work isn't over. It has only just begun. Outside the window, it's getting light. Snow lies on the roofs of Solgok, smooth and clean as salt at the bottom of a cauldron. Somewhere in the forest, a beast is following its trail to a bitter spring. And in the village beyond the ridge of 1,000 wolves, another day is beginning. A day that someone will survive. The forest began 200 paces from the last house. The pines stood thick and close together. The lower branches had been broken off at human height. The bark had been stripped away, not just from the pines, but from the birches as well, and even from the alders by the stream. Yoon walked slowly. His feet sank knee-deep into the snow. The body of its former owner was weak. Every 20 paces he stopped to catch his breath. The air was biting and clear. 15 below, maybe 20. He wasn't walking aimlessly. He was looking for two things. The first was tracks, any kind. Hare tracks, squirrel tracks, fox tracks, even mouse tracks. If there's even a single track here, it means there's a trail. The second thing was juniper, or alder, or both, because without the right kind of wood, smoking isn't possible. Half an hour later, he found an alder tree. 3 trees by a frozen stream, slender, young. Their bark was untouched. Apparently, the locals didn't know that alder bark isn't even edible. Do-yoon memorized the spot. Another 20 minutes later, he spotted a track, a hare's, fresh, made at night. The little animal had been traveling from east to west along the slope, a classic loop, foraging at night, resting in the underbrush during the day, returning by the same route. Do-yoon crouched down. He examined the depth of the tracks, a small hare, 1.5 kilograms live weight, at most. The yield of lean meat is 40%. 600 grams. For one person, that's food for 2 days. For 300 people, it's nothing. But it's a start. He memorized the trail and moved on. In 2 hours, he found 4 more hare tracks. They were all heading roughly in the same direction, east-west along the slope. About 100 meters above the village. That made sense. The hares fed in a clearing with young growth where willow bushes stuck out. They spent the day in the spruce forest higher up. The trails ran parallel, 50 to 70 meters apart. Everything was straight out of a textbook. Do-yoon turned back. He had almost no strength left. His vision was blurry. He hadn't eaten anything since yesterday. And judging by the state of the body, the previous owner hadn't eaten properly in a very long time. In the village, he went to the village head's house. There was no one else to ask. But the largest house on the street stood out, not even because of its size, but because the roof had been repaired. Do-yun approached the door. He knocked. A man in his 50s opened it. Broad-shouldered, once strong, now his skin hung on him like a frame stripped of its paneling. His face was heavy. His eyes were piercing. Village Head Park. He looked at Do-yun and did not invite him in. He said he knew who he was, an exiled clerk. He said the village had no extra food for outsiders. He said his wife already received her share of bark and that it should be enough. Do-yun didn't argue. He asked if there was anyone in the village who set snares for hares. The village head was silent for a moment. Then he said there was, Old Man Moon, but his snares hadn't caught anything in 2 months. Do-yun asked to be shown where Old Man Moon lived. Village Head Park looked at him again, for a long time. Then he pointed toward the third house from the edge. Do-yun bowed and walked over there. Old Man Moon turned out to be a short, wiry man with frost-bitten fingers on his left hand. 2 fingers were missing, the pinky and the ring finger. He was sitting by the entrance, weaving something out of fibers, a rope. Do-yun sat down beside him. Moon glanced at him and muttered. Do-young asked if he could take a look at his nooses. Moon grunted. He said they were ordinary nooses, just like the ones his father and his grandfather had set. Do-young said he wanted to see them. Moon shrugged. He stood up. He led him to the nearby edge of the forest. The snares were set at the edge of the woods, 5 of them. Do-yun crouched down and examined them. Rope snares, tied to stakes, no counterweights, no guides, positioned at the entrance to the forest. The problem was obvious. In fact, there were 3 problems. First, the snares were set at the edge of the woods where the hare runs fast. A hare running at full speed would jump through the snare or break it. They should be set on the trail in the underbrush where the animal moves slowly and can't jump out of the way. Second, there are no guides. Guides are sticks or branches stuck into the ground on either side of the trail that prevent the hare from bypassing the snare. Without them, the animal simply takes a step to the left. Third, the height of the snare. Moon set them at ground level. A hare's head is about a palm's width above the snow. The snare must hang at exactly this height, no lower and no higher. Do-young didn't tell Moon that he was doing it wrong. He asked for 1 snare. Moon handed it over. Do-young took the rope. He found the hare's track he'd spotted earlier. He climbed up the slope toward the willow thicket. He cleared the snow around the trail. He stuck 4 twigs into the ground on either side, 2 on the left and 2 on the right, creating a corridor 1 palm width wide. He tied the snare to a flexible willow branch, bent the branch, and secured it to the snare frame. When the hare sticks its head into the noose, the guard will snap. The branch will straighten and lift the hare into the air, a counterweight. The animal won't break free or gnaw through the rope because it will be hanging, and a fox won't carry off the prey because it's hanging high. Do-young set the snare in 5 minutes. Moon stood nearby and watched in silence. Then he said 1 word. Clever. Do-young replied that it wasn't cunning, but calculation. An animal doesn't think. An animal acts out of habit. A hunter's task isn't to outwit the animal, but to eliminate all its options except one. Moon grunted again, but his eyes were different now, attentive. They returned to the village. Do-yun lay down on the straw in his house, his woman, his wife. She was sitting by the extinguished hearth, mending something. A robe. His robe. The one that had gotten soaked in the snow. She'd hung it up to dry, and now she was sewing up a hole in the shoulder. She didn't ask where he'd been, didn't ask why he'd gone into the forest. He watched her hands. Precise. Quick. The stitches were even. A person who can sew like that can do other things too. Cut. Bandage. Work with materials. These are the hands of a surgeon, or a craftsman, or both. He wanted to ask her name. Then he realized that the body's former owner knew it. And if he asked now, she'd realize that something was wrong. He remained silent. He closed his eyes. In the morning, he'd check the noose. At night, he thought, he didn't really sleep, he just lay there and counted. 312 people, the average protein requirement for survival, 20 grams per person per day. That's the minimum. Below that, muscle breakdown and death set in. 20 grams for 312 people is 6 kilograms, 240 grams of pure protein per day. Converted to meat, that's roughly 25 kilograms of raw carcass, including bones and fat. One reindeer weighs 60 to 70 kilograms. The meat yield is 45%. That's 27 to 30 kilograms. One reindeer per day, or 2 hares a day for one family. There aren't many hares here. He hadn't seen any deer yet. But there were tracks, he was sure of it. There are trails. There are animals. The problem isn't the animals. The problem is the people who have forgotten how to hunt them. In the morning, he got up before dawn. The woman was asleep. He slipped out quietly. He climbed the slope toward the willow thicket. He approached the snare. A hare was hanging there, white. A winter hare, dead. The counterweight branch had worked perfectly. The animal hadn't suffered. The snare had tightened evenly around its neck. Do-Yu took it down. It was still warm. It had been caught an hour or two ago. 1.5 kilos, maybe a little less. He was holding the hare in his hands when something happened. The world flickered. Not with his eyes, with something inside him, as if someone had turned on the map backlight on his GPS. A thin, golden line stretched across the snow from the trail where the snare had been hanging. It ran eastward, through the brush, across the clearing, up the slope, about 400 meters. It ended there. Do-Young blinked. The line didn't disappear. He looked at the hare, then at the line, then back at the hare. He understood. Not right away, not completely, but enough. The hare had shown him the trail, its own, the one it walked every night, and the line wasn't his imagination. It was a clue. Where it came from and why, he didn't know. But the line was real, and it pointed in the direction the hares were coming from, which meant there were more of them there. Do-Yun pressed the hare to his chest and headed downhill. Village headman Park was waiting for him in the village. Moon had already told him. Do-Yun had explored the forest and found the hare's trails. He taught Moon, the old hunter, how to set a counterweighted snare correctly. In the morning, he caught his first hare, and at that moment, the system awakened. The first golden line of an animal trail appeared on the ground. Village Chief Park stood at the gate, looking at the hare in Do-Yun's hands. Moon stood nearby, his lips pressed together, his hands behind his back. Park sized up the hare with a glance. Then he said, "1 hare, for 300 mouths. You've got to be kidding me." Do-Yun didn't argue. He asked for 3 things: the whole hare, a handful of salt from his own supply, and the clay pot he'd seen at Moon's house. Park exchanged a glance with Moon. Moon shrugged. Park nodded. Do-Yun worked right out on the street, in front of the village head's house, without hiding. Let them watch. First, butchering. He asked Moon for a knife, a dull one, but a working one. Do-Yun began to skin the hare. The hands that had once belonged to this body knew nothing, but muscle memory came from somewhere beyond the boundary between worlds. His fingers remembered on their own. He skinned it in a single motion, cutting through the fascia. He didn't tear it. He didn't yank it. The knife followed the connective tissue precisely. The skin came off like a stocking, in one piece. No holes, no traces of meat on the underside. Moon watched, unable to look away. He'd been butchering hares his whole life, but he'd never seen anything like this. Second, when Do-Yun cut open the peritoneum and removed the entrails, something flashed inside him again, like a flash at the edge of his vision. He looked at the carcass and saw it, not with his eyes, with something else. A hare, a male, about a year old. It had been feeding on willow bark and dry grass from under the snow for the past 2 weeks. Healthy, no parasites. It had spent the night on the eastern slope in a spruce grove. It had come from the northeast. The information appeared in his mind like text on a screen that he could see but wasn't actually there. Do-Yun froze for a second. Then he continued butchering the carcass. He didn't throw anything away. He sliced the meat from the carcass into thin strips. Each was 2 to 3 millimeters thick. This required a sharp knife. Moon's knife wasn't suitable. Do-Yun asked for a flat stone. He found one by the stream. He spent 20 minutes sharpening it. Moon silently brought his second knife. It was dull, too. Do-yoon sharpened that one as well. He cut the slices evenly, all the same size. He arranged them on the birch bark. The bones went into the pot. He poured in water. He added a few pieces of pine bark. Moon raised his eyebrows. Do-young explained. Tannins from the bark. Tannins. In small doses, they act as an antiseptic. The broth will be bitter, but it will clear up the gum inflammation in children who've been chewing cellulose for months. It's not medicine, it's a rinse. Moon didn't understand a word, but he nodded. Third, smoking. Do-young sent Moon to gather alder branches. He explained where. 3 trees by the stream. Moon left and returned with an armful. Do-young built a small fire. First, dry juniper. When it burned down to embers, he placed damp alder on top. Thick branches. They didn't burn, they smoldered. The smoke grew thick, white, cold, not hot. That's the whole difference. Hot smoke sears the outside and seals in the moisture. Cold smoke penetrates the meat evenly. It dries it out. It preserves it. It kills bacteria. And it imparts flavor, the real kind, not a burnt taste. Do-young hung the slices over the smoke. Not too high. 60 centimeters from the coals. The temperature at that spot. He checked with his hand. 30 degrees, maybe 35. Perfect. At that temperature, the meat dries slowly and evenly. The protein doesn't coagulate. The texture remains intact. He sat down nearby and waited. By this point, people had gathered around. 7 people, then 12, then more. They watched the smoke, the slices of meat that were slowly darkening. The man sitting next to the fire, adding alder wood from time to time. No one said a word. The children came closer. That same girl with the bark was standing in the front row. She was looking at the meat. For the first time since he'd ever seen her, an expression appeared on her face. Hunger. Not abstract, but concrete. She knew what this meat was, and she wanted it. Do-young didn't look at her. He looked at the smoke. After a day, the thin slices of hare meat had turned into translucent dark petals, dry, light, dense. Do-young took them down. He counted them. 162. From a single hare weighing 1.5 kilograms, 162 pieces, each one the size of a child's palm, each weighing 3 to 4 grams. But those 3 grams weren't just meat. It was meat from which all the water had been removed. Pure protein, pure fat, a concentrate. A single petal provided as much nutritional value as 3 bowls of soaked bark. 1/10 the volume, 15 times the benefit. Do-young called for the village head. Park approached. Do-young held out a single petal to him. Park took it, put it in his mouth, chewed slowly. His expression changed. First, surprise. Then something for which Do-young had no word in this language. Park chewed, and tears streamed down his face. He didn't sob. He didn't wipe his face. He just stood there, chewing and crying. He wasn't crying because of the taste. He was crying because of a single hair. One skinny winter hair that had turned into 160 pieces of food. And that would be enough to feed every child in the village today. Every single one. Do-young said, "This isn't magic. It's a normal consumption rate. You were just doing it wrong." Park wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at Do-young, and for the first time ever, there was no distrust in his eyes. No suspicion, but a question. "Who are you?" Do-young didn't answer. He handed out the petals, to the children first, 1 for each. The girl with the bark got 2. Do-young didn't know why he gave her 2. He just did. She put 1 in her mouth. She clenched the second one in her fist, tightly, as if she were afraid someone would take it away. They poured the broth made of bones and bark into 3 bowls, for the youngest ones, bitter, murky, but hot. And floating in it were tiny strands of meat that had come off the bones. The children drank. One woman stood off to the side and watched. So-rin, his wife. He recognized her by her hands. She hadn't come over for the petal. She stood there watching the man who, just yesterday, had been a quiet, useless clerk, but today was cutting up the carcass like a third-generation butcher and making the village headman cry. Her face bore an expression that Du Yun read instantly. Fear. Not the kind of fear you feel when you're afraid for your life, a different kind. The kind you feel when everything you thought you knew about the person next to you turns out to be a lie, and you don't understand who is living in your house now. At that moment, the system flashed again. Numbers appeared in Du Yun's mind. Salt, 12 units. He didn't realize right away what it meant. Then he remembered the golden line in the snow. He remembered the flash of light during the butchering, and he understood. The hare had been caught, butchered, smoked, eaten by people. Every child who put a petal in their mouth added 1 unit to his total. The system doesn't count the kill. Not killing. It counts feeding. He fed 12 children. He received 12 units. Do Yun stood in the middle of the village. All around him, children were chewing meat. The village elder was silent. His wife watched from the shadows. And in Do Yun's mind, a thought slowly took shape. If the system awards points for feeding, if the map unlocks with every beast he catches, if blueprints are bought with those points, then the math is simple. The more people he feeds, the stronger he'll become. The stronger he becomes, the more people he'll be able to feed. This isn't a hunting system, it's a growth system. Exponential growth. And it's based not on killing, but on caring. Whoever created this knew what they were doing. Do Yun butchered his first hare and turned it into 160 portions of smoked meat. He mastered cold smoking over alder wood chips. He fed the village children. He discovered that the system awards points for feeding people. For the next 3 days, Du Yun set snares, Moon Ho with him, silently, watching, memorizing. Du Yun set 12 snares along the golden line that only he could see. Each one in the underbrush, each one with guide wires, each one with a counterweight made from a flexible branch. On the 3rd day, Moon set his own, without any prompting, correctly. Counterweight, guide wires, a palm's width above the snow. Du Yun looked and nodded. Moon smiled. The first one ever. Of the 12 snares set on the first night, 5 worked. 5 hares. Nothing from Moon's snare. But Du Yun knew why. His snares worked better. Not because he was smarter. The system memorized his handwriting. Any trap he set personally gave a boost to its effectiveness, 40 to 60%. A copy of the same trap set by someone else caught half as many. It wasn't fair, but it was useful. 5 hares, about 7.5 kilograms of live weight, 3 kilograms of lean meat, 800 slices after smoking, 800 servings. 2 days' worth of food for all the children in the village, and there'll still be some left for the elders. Do Yun butchered the carcasses one after another. With each one, the system flashed a burst of information. Second hare, female, 2 years old, fed on aspen bark, came from the southeast, healthy. Third, male, young, less than a year old, fed on acorns. That means there are oak trees somewhere. That means there's another food source. Do Yun memorized every bit of information. The 4th hare showed tracks, not its own. There were tiny hawthorn thorns on its fur. Hawthorn grows on open slopes, on the southern ones, where there's more sun, where the first patches of bare ground appear in winter. That's where the first spring trails will be. Do Yun collected data just as he'd once kept work logs at the meat processing plant. Every animal isn't just meat, it's information, a map, a guide. By the evening of the 3rd day of smoking, the golden network on the map had expanded. 6 trails, all from hares, but one extended farther to the northeast, about 1.5 kilometers. And there, at the very edge of visibility, the trail grew thicker. Another animal, larger. A hare doesn't leave thick tracks. That meant that somewhere to the northeast, along the same corridor, something larger than a hare was moving. A roe deer, or a young stag. Yun didn't venture that far yet. Not yet. His body was still weak. Every day he ate 1 petal from the shared portion. Just 1. Exactly enough to keep from collapsing. The rest went to the children, the elderly, the sick. But the system demanded that he eat. If he didn't eat, the map would dim, the golden lines would fade. He'd tested this on the second day when he'd skipped his portion. By evening, the lines had become almost invisible. In the morning, he ate a petal. The lines returned. It made sense. The system was tied to him personally. He had to be full for it to work. He couldn't go hungry. He couldn't give it all away. He had to keep some for himself. It was an unpleasant realization. On the evening of the fourth day, Yun Mei came to see him, a healer. He'd already heard about her from Moon, young, sharp-tongued, from an old line of herbalists. She wears men's pants. She's the only one who treats the whole village. She didn't knock. She walked into his house. She stood in the doorway. She looked at Sorin, who was sitting by the hearth, then at Do Yun, and she spoke. She said that the 3 children he'd been feeding smoked meat were coughing. She said the smoke from his fire was poisonous. She said he was poisoning the children. She said that if one more child got sick, she would personally throw his smokehouse into the stream. Do Yun listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked one question. The children had been coughing even before he started smoking meat. Yun Mei fell silent. Then she said yes. Do Yun nodded. He said the coughing wasn't from the smoke. It was from scurvy, from a vitamin C deficiency. 9 months without fresh food, without fermented vegetables, no meat. Their gums were receding. Their lungs were inflamed. Their immune systems were shot. Any draft meant bronchitis. Yun Mei listened, and her expression changed, not because she took his word for it, but because she knew all this herself. She knew the children weren't sick from the smoke. She knew the problem was hunger. But she'd been treating this village for 5 years with herbs and decoctions, and they hadn't helped, because herbs aren't a substitute for protein. And she hadn't come here to argue. She'd come to see for herself. Could this strange man do what she hadn't been able to do in 5 years? Then Yun stood up. He walked over to the birch bark bundle where the scraps from butchering lay. He took out a piece, dark, firm, liver, hair liver. He'd set it aside on purpose. He hadn't smoked it. He'd salted it separately, dried it in the air. He held it out to Yun Mei. He said, "This is medicine. The liver contains retinol, vitamin A. A deficiency leads to night blindness. Then the immune system weakens. Then the children stop growing. Give a small piece a day to every child, every day, without fail." Yun Mei took the liver. She turned it over in her hands. She sniffed it. Then she looked at him and asked the question Du Yun had been waiting for since day one. She asked how an exiled clerk knew about retinol. Du Yun answered without hesitation. He said he'd read many books. Yun Mei snorted. She said that such books didn't exist. She said she was a 4th-generation doctor's daughter and was hearing the word retinol for the first time. Du Yun shrugged. He said that if she didn't like the word, she could call it liver essence. The main thing was to give it to the children every day. Yun Mei looked at him for another 10 seconds. Then she turned around and left. She took the liver with her. Sorin sat by the hearth and said nothing. When the door closed behind the doctor, she spoke to him on her own for the first time in all these days. She didn't answer a question. She just spoke. She asked why he was different. Do Yun turned to her. She looked straight at him, without fear, without accusation, just straight ahead. She said that the Han Do Yun of the past didn't know how to hold a knife, didn't know what a liver was, didn't know the words he was saying. She said she'd lived for 3 years with a man who was afraid of his own shadow, and now he was cutting meat like a butcher and talking to the doctor as an equal. She asked who he was. Do Yun remained silent for a long time. Then he said he was the one who would try to make sure she never went hungry again. Sorin didn't answer. She turned away toward the hearth. But the hands that had been mending the robe paused for a second. Then they continued. The stitches were even. In the morning, Do Yun checked the salt supply. 13 system units. That wasn't enough. He opened the internal interface. The system displayed the available blueprints. The first one cost 20 units. A diagram of a trap pit with a counterweight. For large game, deer, roe deer, wild boar, Do Yun needed 7 more units. 7 units meant 7 people he could feed. He went outside, to the smokehouse, which was still just an open-air fire with alder wood chips. He needed a real smokehouse, an enclosed chamber, with temperature control, with condensate drainage. Without a blueprint, he could build it from memory. He'd built simple ones like this during practical training at the university, made of clay and stone, with a chimney for draft and a damper to regulate the smoke flow. He needed a pair of hands. He went to see Moon. By then, Yoon had set up a system of traps and caught 5 hares in 3 days. He discovered that the system reads information about the animal during butchering. He met the doctor, Yoon Mei, and convinced her to use the liver as a remedy for vitamin deficiency. Rin asked him directly for the first time who he was. He'd saved up 13 units and was preparing to build his first real smokehouse. Moon brought 2 men. The older one was Cho, a quiet man in his 40s with the hands of a mason. And the younger one was Hong, 22 years old, thin and quick. A former blacksmith's assistant from a neighboring village that was wiped out last winter. Hong arrived in Seolgok 3 months ago, alone, until Yoon explained what they needed: a smokehouse. He sketched it in the snow with a stick. The foundation? Stone masonry, waist-high, 1.5 meters wide, 1 meter deep, a clay vault on top, a firebox at the bottom, separated from the chamber by a distance of 2 meters, connected via an underground channel. The smoke travels through the channel. It cools down. It enters the chamber already cold. The temperature in the chamber doesn't exceed 30 degrees. There are hooks in the chamber for hanging meat. In the vault, there's an opening with a damper to regulate the draft. Cho looked at the drawing. He scratched the back of his head. He said there was a rock by the stream, flat, shale. It's easy to chisel. There's clay there, too, under the snow on the southern slope. It hasn't frozen all the way through. We can dig. Do-yoon nodded. They started working that same day. Cho chiseled the stone. He had a tool for it, not a chisel, but something like a wedge made from a deer antler. But it worked perfectly. The slabs fit together perfectly. Hong dug the trench. The ground was frozen, but not all the way to the bottom. Beneath the top layer was clay, reddish and rich. Hong dug quickly. By evening, the 2-meter-long trench was ready. Do-yoon mixed the clay with straw. His hands were freezing. His fingers lost sensation every 10 minutes. He warmed them under his armpits and kept going. So Rin arrived in the afternoon, silently. She stood beside him. She looked at his hands covered in clay. Then she left. She returned with rags. She wrapped them around his palms, tightly, skillfully. A bandage, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. Do-yoon looked at her. She didn't look back. She left. They worked for 4 days. On the second day, more people came. Not because Do-yoon had asked them to, because they'd seen what was happening. 2 teenagers, boys about 14 or 15 years old. They hauled stones from the stream. One of the women, Mrs. Kim, the widow, was mixing clay. Silently, without a word. She just walked over and started working. On the third day, village head Park came to take a look. He stood there for a long time. Then he said, "Don't build a second one. One will be enough. Don't anger the spirits." Do-yoon replied that there wouldn't be a second one for now. Park nodded and left. But Do-yoon knew that one wouldn't be enough. One chamber holds a 30-kilogram load. That's 1 reindeer. The smoking cycle takes anywhere from 1 to 3 days, depending on the thickness of the cuts. A maximum of 10 kilograms of finished product per cycle. For 300 people, that's a 2-day supply. He'd need at least 3 chambers working in shifts, but that would come later. For now, just 1. By the 4th day, the smokehouse was ready. Low-ceilinged, stone-built, with a clay vault and a chimney made of twisted birch bark coated with clay. The chimney wasn't perfect. It'll last a month. Then it'll need to be replaced. But a month is enough. Do-young lit a fire in the furnace. Alder logs, large ones. They smoldered slowly. Smoke flowed through the flue. Do-young reached his hand into the chamber. The smoke was warm, not hot, 25 degrees. The draft was working. The damper regulated the flow. He loaded the first batch, Rabbit meat, 3 carcasses from his morning hunt, sliced into thin strips and hung on hooks made of birch twigs. Do-young closed the chamber and sat down nearby. He waited. Yun-mei appeared an hour later. She walked around the smokehouse as if it were a suspicious object. She touched the wall. She looked into the chimney. She leaned toward the firebox and sniffed the smoke. Then she sat down next to Do-yun, silently. 5 minutes later, she spoke. She said she'd given the liver to 3 children with night blindness, in small pieces, 3 grams each, as he'd said. She said there were no results yet. Do-yun replied that results would be seen in a week, maybe 2. Retinol builds up in the body. It doesn't work instantly. Yun-mei nodded. Then she asked why they were using alder smoke instead of pine. Do-yun explained. Pine is resin. Resinous smoke contains carcinogens. In small doses, it's not a big deal. But why use it when there's alder? Alder smoke is pure, low resin content, mild flavor, suitable for any kind of meat. Yun-mei listened. Her eyes were sharp. She wasn't just listening, she was memorizing. Then she asked if it was possible to smoke herbs instead of meat. Yu paused to think. In his past life, smoked spices existed. Smoked paprika, smoked salt. But herbs? It depends on the purpose. If it's for preservation, then yes. Cold smoke will dry them out and add an antiseptic effect. Herbs will last longer that way. If it's for medicinal purposes, though, you'd need to check. Some substances break down when exposed to smoke. Others don't. He told her that. She stood up, said she'd bring her herbs tomorrow. Then she left. Do-yun smiled. The first person in this world to ask the right question. Not how, not why, but can this be applied to something else? On the 5th day after it was built, the smokehouse produced its first full batch, 400 petals from 3 hares. The quality was superior to that from an open fire. The meat had an even color, no burnt spots, no raw patches. The aroma was clean, like alder, with a slight sweetness. Do-yun tasted one. The texture was just right. It snapped rather than stretched. That meant all the moisture was gone. Storage at this level of dryness, 2 weeks at room temperature, 1 month at 0. It's -15 outside, so if packed properly, it'll last until spring. Do-yun handed out 200 petals to children and the elderly. He kept 200. For the first time in Solgok, there was a stockpile. The system credited him with units, 23. Do-yun now had a total of 36. 20 of them he had spent. He opened the first blueprint, a diagram of a trap pit with a counterweight. For a large beast, the blueprint unfolded in his mind like a 3-dimensional model. A pit 1.5 meters deep, 1 meter wide, a sloped bottom. At the edge of the pit, a camouflaged platform made of twigs and pine needles. Under the decking, stakes were driven into the bottom, not sharpened, blunt. The goal was not to kill the beast, but to hold it. A killed beast begins to spoil immediately. A live animal in the pit is fresh meat. Next to the pit is a counterweight system. A rope tied to the decking leads to a signal stick near the village. When the animal falls through, the decking tugs on the rope. The stick falls. The hunter sees the signal. He goes to retrieve the game. There's no need to check the pit every day. It will let him know on its own when it's triggered. Before that, Yun had been studying the blueprint. He knew all of this, not from the system, from books, from documentaries, from a course on commercial hunting that he'd taken out of interest while writing an article about wild game for his blog. The system hadn't given him anything new. It had organized what he already knew, formatted it, refined the dimensions, shown the optimal angles, added details that he might have forgotten, as if it had unlocked his own memory and organized it into neat categories. Do-yun closed his eyes. Salt, 16 units remaining. The next diagram, a recipe for a basic brine for curing meat. 25 units. Not enough. But there'll be enough soon, if the pit catches a reindeer. And if the reindeer is butchered and smoked and eaten, One deer can feed 100 people, 100 units, all at once. Then the brine, the icehouse design, the salted meat recipe, and the blueprint for the second double-chamber smokehouse will all be unlocked. It's all connected. Hunting, processing, feeding, growth. Do-yoon opened his eyes. He looked at the forest. The golden thread of the trail led off to the northeast, to where it widened, where a large beast had passed. Tomorrow he would go there, with Moon, and with the blueprint of the pit in his mind. Do-yoon returned to the house. Rin-si was sitting by the hearth. 3 slices of smoked meat lay on a birch bark plate in front of her, his portion for the day. She had saved it for him. He sat down beside her. He took 1 slice. He held out the second to her. She looked at his hand, then at him. He said she should eat too. She took it. They sat side by side and ate in silence. The fire in the hearth crackled. The 3rd slice lay on the birch bark between them. Do-yoon broke it in half. 1 half for her, the other for himself. So Rin pressed her lips together. She lowered her head. She didn't say a word, but he saw it. Her shoulders trembled once. She swallowed her half without chewing, quickly, as if she were afraid he'd change his mind. 3 years. For 3 years, she'd lived with a man who didn't share his food with her, because there was no food, or because he didn't think to, or because he'd forgotten there was anyone else beside him. Do-yoon didn't know the previous owner of this body, but from So-rin's reaction, he understood enough. In the morning, Do-yoon and Moon set out toward the northeast. Moon carried a rope. Do-yoon carried what was left of the tools, a shovel, a wedge, and a knife he'd sharpened to razor's edge. They followed the golden line. Moon couldn't see it. He could only see Do-yoon, who walked confidently through the forest as if he knew the way. Moon asked if he'd been here before. Do-yoon said no. Moon grunted but said nothing. After about a kilometer, the line grew thicker. Another 300 meters on, Do-yoon spotted tracks, fresh, hooves, split, deep. A deer, a large one, a male judging by the width of its stride. It had been traveling from east to west, a nighttime trek, returning from a watering hole to its resting place. Do-yoon stopped. He crouched down. He looked at the trail. The trail was well trodden, not by just one animal, by several. The tracks were layered. They used this route regularly, every night or every other night. He found a spot for the pit, a narrowing of the trail between 2 boulders. The deer couldn't go around them. It could only pass between them. The distance between the boulders was 2 meters. Perfect. They dug for 3 hours. The ground was frozen to a depth of 20 centimeters. Below that was clay, loose clay. They dug the pit 1.5 meters deep. They leveled the bottom. They reinforced the walls with branches so they wouldn't crumble. A platform made of poles and pine needles was laid on top. They covered it with snow. They covered the tracks with fir branches. They stretched a rope from the platform through the bushes to the nearest tree. There they hung a signal stick. It was visible from afar. When the platform collapsed, the stick would fall. Everything was according to the blueprint. By sunset, Yoon and Moon had returned to the village. Yoon-mei was standing by the smokehouse. She had hung a bundle of some herbs inside. Next to it, on a rock, lay a birch bark note. It was long, with small handwriting. Do-yoon picked it up and read it. Yoon-mei had listed 12 herbs she wanted to test in the smoke. For each one, she noted the expected effect. For each one, she asked a question. Would the alder smoke destroy the active ingredient or preserve it? Do-yoon smiled. She hadn't waited for an answer. She'd started the experiment herself. She'd hung up the first batch. She'd compared the smoked version with the unsmoked one, like a researcher, not like a healer. Do-yoon raised his head. He looked toward the forest. Somewhere to the northeast, between 2 boulders, stood his pit, and a deer was walking toward it along the trail. Do-yoon knew this. He didn't sense it, he knew it. The golden line on the map was pulsing. The beast was coming. With the help of the villagers, Do-yoon built his first real cold smoke smokehouse. He earned enough system points to unlock the blueprint for a trap pit. Together with Moon, he dug it on the deer trail. Young Mei began her experiments with smoking herbs. For the first time, Rin shared her food with him. The signal stick fell at dawn. Moon was the first to see it. He ran to Do Young's house and pounded on the wall with his fist. Do Young was already awake. He had seen the golden line on the map flash, but briefly, brightly, briefly, the beast had entered the pit. They walked quickly, Moon in front, Do Young behind him. His body was still weak, but over the past week he had eaten every day, and his legs were more steady. The snow crunched under their feet. The forest was silent. Morning fog hung between the tree trunks. 40 minutes later, they reached the boulders. The floor had caved in. A deer stood in the pit. A male, young, 2 years old, maybe 2.5. Small antlers, 4 points. He stood at the bottom and didn't struggle. His eyes were large, dark, calm. Its legs were intact. The stake-free floor had worked as intended. The animal wasn't maimed. It simply couldn't jump out. Do Yoon looked down at it from above. For a long time. In his past life, he hadn't killed animals. He'd worked with carcasses that arrived at the plant already dead, in plastic containers, labeled and stamped by veterinary control. But here stood a live deer, looking up at him from below. Moon pulled out a knife. Do Yoon stopped him, said he'd do it himself. He climbed down into the pit. The deer flinched. Do Yoon placed his hand on its neck. The animal froze. Do Yoon found the spot, under the jaw, where the artery is closest to the surface. The knife went in quickly. One cut, deep, precise. The deer slumped. Blood gushed onto the snow. Hot, thick, the smell of iron and grass. Do Yoon held it until it stopped twitching. 20 seconds, maybe 30. Then he let go. His hands were covered in blood up to his elbows. Moon watched from above, silently. Then he said one word. Clean. Do Yoon didn't answer. He waited. The system flashed, stronger than ever. Information poured in. A deer, a male, 2 years and 4 months old. For the past 3 weeks, he'd been feeding on willow bark and dry grass from under the snow. 2 days ago, he drank from a stream on the eastern slope. He spent the night in a spruce forest at an elevation of 300 meters. Healthy, no parasites. Came from the northeast. Migrated along a trail leading from the pass. The trail is old. 6 or 7 individuals use it, seasonally. In winter, solitary males cross the pass. In spring, females will follow with their young, by a different route, further south, across the clearing with the hawthorns. A map flashed in Do Yoon's mind. Golden threads stretched out in all directions. The hare trail he'd seen before had tripled in size. But most importantly, a deer trail had appeared, thick, distinct. It ran from the pit to the northeast, through the spruce forest, over the pass, and beyond, out of sight. There were more deer out there, and the trail showed where they were headed. A single deer had revealed kilometers of territory. Do Yoon and Moon dragged the carcass out of the pit. 65 kilograms, maybe 70. They hauled it on tied-together poles. 2 kilometers, through the snow. Do Yoon nearly fell 3 times. Moon dragged it in silence, his face stony. When they emerged from the forest toward the village, they were spotted. The boy who carried stones for the smokehouse, he was standing by the stream. He saw the deer on the poles. His mouth fell open, and he ran into the village. 5 minutes later, everyone was out on the street. 312 people. They were looking at the deer. Some stood in silence. Some dropped to their knees. An old woman began to murmur a prayer. The children came closer. That very girl, So Na. Do Yoon already knew her name. He'd learned it from Moon. So Na stood in the front row and looked at the carcass. Her eyes were huge. She had never seen a whole deer before. Village Chief Park stepped forward. He looked at the deer, then at Do Yoon. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. Once, heavily, as if something inside had broken and snapped back into place at the same time. Do Yoon butchered the deer in the street, in front of everyone. He took his time. He demonstrated. Moon stood nearby. Hong came closer. Cho did too. Du-Yun commented on every movement. First, the hide. A cut from the throat to the groin. Trim the fascia. Don't tear it. Don't yank it. The hide comes off on its own if the knife is used correctly. Deer hide is thick, valuable. It's used for clothing. Belts are made from it. Shoe soles are made from it. Nothing is thrown away. Then the entrails. The livers separately. The heart separately. The lungs separately. Clean and rinse the intestines. They'll be used as casings for sausages. Someday. Not now. For now, just preserve them. Rinse the stomach, too. It'll be used as a storage bag. Then the meat. Du-Yun cut the carcass into pieces. Hind legs, forelegs, back, ribs, neck, trimmings. Each piece on its own hook. Each piece for its own purpose. Hind legs, large chunks, for slow smoking. 3 days in the smokehouse. This will be the main supply. Firm meat. Keeps well. Front legs, tougher, more tendons. For long simmering. Broth for the elderly and children. Back, the best meat, thinly sliced, cold smoked for a day. Slices, like hare meat, only larger. Ribs, hot smoked, 2 hours at 60 degrees. A quick meal for today. Neck, stringy, for slow braising in a pot with bark and water. Thick stew. Trimmings, small pieces, mix with fat and salt. Stuff into washed intestines. The simplest sausage. Not perfect, no spices, no nitrites, but edible and keeps for a week. Bones, for broth, every single one. Hooves too. Aspic, gelatin, for children with joint problems. Antlers, raw material, used to make tools, awls, buttons, hooks for meat in the smokehouse. Fat. Do-Yun rendered the internal fat separately, melted it in a pot. Pure white lard. Calorie content, 900 kilocalories per 100 grams. A spoonful of lard and bark porridge turns cellulose into food. Not good food, but enough. Do-Yun didn't throw away a single thing from the 70 kilograms of deer. Zero waste. Every gram was put to use. Butchering took 4 hours. People stood around and watched. Some left and came back. Some stood there the whole 4 hours. Yun Mei stood closest of all. She looked at the liver that Do-Yun had set aside, at the heart, at the lungs. She already knew why. When Do-Yun finished, he loaded the smoker. The first batch, the back, thinly sliced. The ribs went on the grill. For that, he built a second fire, a regular one, with intense heat. The ribs were placed on a rack over the coals. The smell wafted through the village 10 minutes later. Do-Yun saw how people turn their heads, how their nostrils quiver. How children get up from their seats and head toward the fire. The smell of meat, real meat, grilled over coals, for people who had been eating bark for 9 months. That smell was stronger than any words. That evening, Do-Yun handed out the ribs, 1 piece for each person, a small one, but real, with bone, with meat, with fat, with juice that drips down your fingers. 312 portions. It wouldn't have been enough if he'd cut them as usual, but he cut them like a master butcher. Every piece was precisely calculated. The meat between the ribs, thin, but there's plenty of it if you trim it right. The children ate in silence. It was a different kind of silence, not the silence of hunger, the silence of being full, for the first time in months, maybe for years. The system tallied it up. 312 units, in a single evening, from a single reindeer. Do-Yun closed his eyes. A list of available blueprints unfolded in his mind. The recipe for the basic brine, 25 units. The design of a glacier in permafrost, 50 units. A diagram of a double smokehouse with smoke fraction separation, 70 units. The formula for a brine mixture with herbs, 30 units. A blueprint for a signal tower to monitor the trails, 40 units. He could unlock everything. Right now. He had 348 units. He unlocked the brine, and the ice, and the brine mixture. 3 blueprints unfolded in his mind, one after another. Recipes, dimensions, proportions. Everything he knew from his past life, but systematized and refined. Do-Yun sat by the smokehouse. Inside the chamber, the deer's back was slowly being smoked. The smoke rose steadily, alder smoke, pure. Nearby, on a rock, a pot of broth was cooling. Sorin was sitting by the house, a bowl of broth in her hands. She drank in small sips, slowly, not greedily, as if she were afraid this was a dream and it would end if she hurried. Do-yoon watched her, then at the village, then at the golden map in his head. A network of trails stretched north, east, south. The game was everywhere. He just had to find it and catch it the right way. The hunting pit had worked, and Do-yoon had bagged his first deer. He butchered it in front of the entire village without wasting a single gram. He fed all 312 residents. The system credited him with a huge supply of units, and he unlocked the blueprints for the brine, the glacier, and the curing mixture. The next morning, Do-yoon gathered 5 people, Moon, Cho, Hong, and 2 teenagers, Gi-tae and Bom, the very ones who had been hauling stones. Do-yoon told them he would teach them how to butcher, not just once, but every day until their hands remembered the process. Moon nodded. Cho said nothing. Hong asked why. Do-yoon simply, because if anything happens to me, the village needs to be able to manage without me. The 5 exchanged glances. Do-yoon didn't explain any further. He led them into the forest, to the pit. The pit needed to be restored, new decking, new camouflage. That took 2 hours. Then he led them further along the trail. The golden line ran northeast. Moon walked beside him and watched as Do-yoon chose the direction. After 1.5 kilometers, Do-yoon stopped. He pointed out the tracks. Deer droppings, fresh, from the past day, 3 piles. 3 animals had passed through here last night. Moon crouched down. He touched them. He sniffed them. He looked at Do-yoon with an expression he hadn't shown before. Respect. Not for his knowledge, for the result. Do-yoon chose a spot for the second pit. A fork in the trail by a fallen spruce. The animal goes around the spruce on the right. It's narrow there. There's 1.20 meters between the trunk and the rocky outcrop. They dug until evening. They returned in the dark. Yoon-mei was waiting for them at the smokehouse. She was sitting on a rock, taking notes on birch bark. 2 bundles of herbs hung nearby. One was smoked, the other wasn't. She said she'd conducted her first comparison. The smoked motherwort had retained its scent, but had become bitter. The smoked chamomile had lost some of its aroma, but its color had darkened. Yoon-mei spoke quickly, clearly, like a speaker at a conference. Do-yu listened and nodded. Then he said that the bitterness in motherwort was normal. It was due to tannins from the smoke. If brewed with hot water, some of it would go away. Yoon-mei wrote it down. Then she looked at him. For a long time. She said he was strange. He said he knew. She smirked. It was the first time she'd done that in front of him. The smirk was brief and sharp, like a scratch. In the morning, village head Park came to see Do-yoon. He brought an old man with him, Yeon-suk, the oldest man in Solgok. He was over 70, maybe older. No one knew for sure. Yeon-suk sat down on a rock by the smokehouse and was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. He said he'd heard of people like Do-yoon a long time ago, when he was a boy. His grandmother used to tell him about them. People who talk to meat. People who see animal trails in the empty forest. Chon-in. His grandmother said that the last Chon-in had been killed at court 200 years ago because they had become too powerful, because the northern villages obeyed them more than they obeyed the king. Yeon-suk looked at Do-yoon. His eyes were cloudy, senile, but deep down there was something sharp. He asked, "You're a Chon-in." Do-yoon didn't know how to respond. He didn't know that word. He didn't know the legend. He knew nothing about the spirits of the ridge or the ancient pact. But the system inside him responded to that word, quietly, like an echo in an empty hall. The golden lines on the map grew brighter for a second. Then they returned to their usual brightness. Do-yoon said he didn't know who he was. He said there was only one thing he knew how to do: make sure the meat didn't go to waste and that people had something to eat. Yeon-suk nodded. Then he mentioned one more thing. Grandma An. She had lived in Solgok. She had died 2 years ago, in winter. from starvation. Everyone thought she was crazy. She talked to animal carcasses. She stroked dead hairs and whispered something to them. People laughed. Then they stopped because they didn't have the strength to laugh anymore. She died quietly. She lay down and didn't get up. Before she died, she said one sentence: "He will come, the one who knows how to feed." Yon Sok fell silent. Park stood nearby, staring at the ground. Do-yun stood there and felt something heavy inside him slowly sink to the bottom. Grandmother An, the former bearer of the system. She died of starvation. The system didn't save her because she was alone. A single old woman cannot set a trap, butcher a carcass, smoke the meat, and feed the village. A system without hands is. She chose Do-yun. It wasn't by chance. She searched across worlds for someone who knew how. And she found a meat processing plant technician who ran a blog about the efficient use of carcasses. 87 followers, 1 post a month. That was enough. Do-yun sat down on a rock next to Yon Sok. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know her, but I'll do what she wanted." Yon Sok nodded. He stood up. He left. Park stood there for another minute. Then he said quietly, "Build a second smokehouse." Do-yun looked up. Park wasn't looking at him. He was watching the smoke. Then he walked away. Permission had been granted. Do-yun began building that very day. A second smokehouse, larger than the first. A double chamber, one for cold smoke, the other for hot smoke. The blueprint from the system provided exact proportions. The length of the channel was 3 meters for the cold chamber, 1.5 for the hot one. The difference in temperature: 25 degrees in the cold chamber, 60 in the hot one. Different products, different times. Cho laid the stones. Hong dug the channels. Gite and Bom mixed the clay. Moon took charge when Do-yun left to check the traps. 4 more men joined the construction crew. Men from the village. Do-yun didn't know their names yet. They came in silence. They worked. They left. They asked for nothing. They saw the meat. They saw what the children were eating. That was enough. 5 days later, the second smokehouse was standing. Heavy, sturdy. Do-yun loaded both chambers. The cold chamber received thin slices from the hind legs of a deer. The hot chamber received the ribs and neck from the second deer that had fallen into the pit 3 days earlier. The second deer, a female, younger than the first, 50 kilograms. The map had expanded by another kilometer. Do-yun could now see trails within a 3-kilometer radius of the village. Deer tracks. And at the very edge of his vision, something else. Larger than a deer. Wider. Heavier. A wild boar. Or an elk. He didn't know yet. But the line was there. Golden and thick. And it was pulsing. Something big was moving there. Between the smokehouses, Do-yun dug a pit for an ice cellar. Not very deep. 2 row testers. The permafrost was close by here, 1.20 meters. The ground never thawed. A natural freezer. He lined the walls with stone. On top, a roof made of poles and clay. The entrance was on the north side. The door was made of woven branches coated with clay. Inside, it was -5 even when it was -15 outside. A stable temperature. Meat kept in the ice house lasted for months. No need to smoke everything at once. You could store it fresh and smoke it in batches as needed. When Do-yun finished the ice house and loaded the first batch into it, 10 kilograms of venison, fresh, he sat down by the door and did the math. 2 smokehouses, an ice house, 12 hair traps, 2 deer pits, 5 apprentices who already knew how to skin an animal without tearing the hide. 1 healer who had started using smoked liver as medicine. 1 village head who was no longer afraid. 1 month had passed. Not a single child had died. Then Yoon learned the story of Grandmother An, the former keeper of the system who had died of starvation in Solgok. Village Chief Park granted permission for a second smokehouse. A second smokehouse with a double chamber and an ice house in the permafrost were built. A second reindeer was hunted. The map expanded and revealed the tracks of a large beast at the edge of visibility. The third month. Snow still lay on the ground, but the sun began to rise higher. The days grew 2 hours longer. Do-Yun counted the supplies every morning. There were 20 kilograms of fresh meat in the icehouse. Something was always hanging in the smokehouses. The supply of smoked meat in the storeroom. 40 kilograms. That would last a week if everyone were fed. But Do-Yun didn't want to feed them the bare minimum. He wanted to create a surplus. Because surplus means freedom. When people aren't thinking about food every second, they start thinking about other things. About home. About repairs. About the future. The village was changing. Slowly, but noticeably. Cho and Hong repaired the roof on Widow Kim's house. Not because Do-Yun asked them to, because they'd found the strength to do it. The boy, Gi-tae, started setting the snares on his own. Without supervision. Out of his 8 hinges, 3 worked. Not perfect, but they worked. Bom learned to skin an animal in 20 minutes. Do-Yun did it in 10, but 20 was good for a start. Yun-mei stopped scolding him. Now she came to the smokehouse every evening, and they talked. She talked about herbs. He talked about fermentation. She didn't know that word. He explained. It's the process by which bacteria or fungi break down a product and make it healthier and safer. Pickling, fermentation, cheese aging, all of that is fermentation. Yun-mei listened. She took notes. Then she said her mother used to do something similar with soybeans. She'd cover them with water, leave them in a warm place for a week. It turned into a paste, dark, thick, salty. She'd add it to soup. Yun nodded. Soybean paste. Dojang, a classic. Fermented protein. Easily digestible. Rich in amino acids. If they had soybeans, he would already be making it. But there were no beans. Only meat. Do-Young thought for a moment. Then he said, fermented meat paste. Made from trimmings and offal. Grind it up. Mix it with salt. Add a little fermented pine bark broth as a starter. Leave it in a warm place for 3 or 4 days. You'll end up with a paste. Concentrated protein. For the elderly who can't chew. For the sick. For children with weak stomachs. Yun-mei looked at him. Her eyes lit up. She said she wanted to try it. Tomorrow. They made the first batch together. Do-Yun ground up the trimmings. Yun-mei added her herbal kvass. They mixed it, added salt, stored it in a warm spot near the smokehouse. After 4 days, the paste was ready. Dark, fragrant, salty, with a hint of sourness from the kvass. Do-Yun tasted it. The texture was just right. The flavor was strong, sharp, not for everyone, but for the sick, it's better than nothing. Yun-mei gave the paste to 3 elderly men who could no longer eat solid food. A spoonful in hot water, broth in a minute. The old men drank it, and on the second day, one of them got up from his cot. For the first time in 2 weeks. Yun-mei didn't say a word. But that evening, she came to the smokehouse with a birch bark scroll. A long one, covered in fine handwriting on both sides. It was a list. All the sick people in the village. 37 people. For each one, she wrote down their symptoms. And next to each one, what kind of meat might help. Liver for night blindness, broth for weak stomachs, paste for toothless old people, fat for frostbitten fingers. She'd put together a prescription list, just like a doctor on rounds. Then Yun read it. He looked at her and said that this was exactly what was needed. Individualized nutrition, something different for everyone. Yun-mei didn't look away, but something in her eyes flinched for a second. Then she took the scroll and left. Quickly, so Rin saw it. She stood at the door of the house and watched Yun-mei leave. Then she looked at Do-Yun. Her expression was hard to read. Not jealousy, not anger. Something quieter, sadder. She went inside. Do-Yun followed her in. So Rin was sitting by the hearth, with her back to him. She was silent. He sat down beside her. They sat in silence for a long time. Then he spoke. He said he wanted to build a small smokehouse, at their house, for her. So she'd always have her own supply. Not a shared one, a personal one. Nuts. If they found some pine nuts, or berries when spring came, or something else, her very own. So Rin turned her head. She looked at him. Do-yoon didn't see any tears. She didn't cry in front of him. She just looked at him, and in her eyes was something he hadn't seen before. Warmth. Small, cautious, like the flame of a splinter of wood that could still be blown out by a draft. But it was already burning. She said quietly, "All right." Just one word. Something else happened this week. A person came to the village. A woman, alone, with a wolf bite on her thigh, bandaged with a dirty rag. She was limping, tall, skinny to the point of transparency. The left side of her face was scarred, an old scar, not fresh. Her eyes were dark, empty. She had come from the north, from the village of Bekho, which had been wiped out. Moon knew about Bekho. 30 souls, a hunting village, a small one. Everyone had died last winter. She was the sole survivor. Kang Ara. She made it to the gates of Solgok and collapsed. Yun Mei was the first to approach her. She bandaged the wound. It was lacerated and inflamed. A wolf had torn a muscle. But the bone was intact. If it didn't get infected, she would survive. Do-yoon brought her some broth, hot with fat. She drank it, her hands trembling. He brought her some petals, 4 of them. She ate them and looked at him. Her first glance. No gratitude, no tears. The same look So-na had on the first day, tired, hollow. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep. She slept for 2 days. Yun Mei changed her bandages. Do-yoon brought her food. So Rin brought a blanket, her own, the only spare one. On the 3rd day, Kang Ara got up. She went outside. She looked at the smokehouse, at the glacier, at the people walking with straight backs, not staggering from weakness. Then she looked at Do-yoon, who was butchering a hare by the smokehouse. She walked over. She stood beside him. She watched in silence. Then she said one sentence. She said that in Bekho, she used to bring 1 hare a day, every day, 1. For 30 people. It wasn't enough. Her younger brothers died first, then the rest. She hunted until the very end. But 1 hunter can't feed a village. Do-yoon put down his knife. He looked at her. He said what he was thinking. He said she'd brought everything she could, that the problem wasn't her, that 1 hunter in the field doesn't solve the problem. A system is needed. Traps, storage, processing, the cold, calculation. She couldn't have done it alone. No one could have. Kang Ara was silent. Her face was stony. Her hands were clenched. Then something inside her snapped. Not on the outside, on the inside. She didn't cry, but her shoulders slumped, as if she'd been carrying something heavy for 2 years and had just set it down on the ground for the first time. She said she would stay. Do-yoon nodded. Do-yoon and Yun Mei created a fermented meat paste for the sick and the elderly. Yun Mei drew up a recipe sheet for the entire village. Do-yoon suggested building a private smokehouse for So-rin. Kang Ara arrived in the village from the extinct town of Bekho. Do-yoon absolved her of blame for the deaths of her people, and she decided to stay. Kang Ara began working on the 3rd day after her arrival. The wound on her thigh hadn't healed yet. Yun Mei scolded her, saying her leg wouldn't hold up. Ara didn't listen. She got up at dawn. She took her bow, an old one, wrapped in birch bark. The shoulders were cracked, but the bowstring was strong. She went into the forest before anyone else woke up. She returned 4 hours later with 2 hares and a fox. The fox was large, red, with thick winter fur. Ara dropped her catch by the smokehouse and sat down. Her leg was bleeding through the bandage. Do-yoon approached. He looked at the catch, then at her leg. He called for Yun Mei. While Yun Mei re-bandaged Ara, grumbling under her breath, Do-yoon examined the hares. The system provided information. Both were from the northern slope. Both had been feeding on willow. Both had been traveling along a trail he hadn't seen before. A new trail, not marked on his map, because it wasn't his trap that caught them, but her arrow. So the system works not only with his traps, It works with any game that falls into his hands to be butchered. Interesting. He butchered the hares and the fox. He didn't smoke the fox meat. It's tasteless, tough, but the pelt, fox fur, is a treasure. Warm, light. It can be made into a hat, or a collar, or a lining for shoes. Do-yoon gave the pelt to So-rin. She knew how to tan it. An ash solution, a scraper, 2 days of work. The pelt will become soft. Do-yoon spoke with Ara that evening. She was sitting by the fire, mending a bowstring. Her hands were quick, precise. Her movements were economical, not a single unnecessary one. He asked if she knew the trails in the northwest. She looked at him, said she did. Baeko lay to the northwest. She'd been hunting there for 10 years, since she was 6. Her father taught her, and her grandfather, from an old hunting family, 4 generations. Do-yoon asked about wild boars. Ara nodded. She said the wild boar trails ran along the western ridge. In winter, the boars come down lower. They look for acorns under the snow. Their trails are predictable. But a wild boar is dangerous. A pit won't hold a large boar. You need a deeper pit, and wider, and lined with stakes. Do-yoon listened. A wild boar, 120, 150 kilograms. One large boar, a 50% meat yield, 60 to 70 kilograms of pure meat from a single animal. And fat, wild boar fat, thick, white, as high in calories as lard, but easier to prepare. Salt it, smoke it, slice it thin. A chunk of smoked wild boar fat with a piece of bread. There's no bread. With a piece of flat bread made from acorn flour. If we can find acorns. Ara mentioned acorns. Acorns mean oak trees. Oak trees mean flour. Flour means flatbreads. Then Yoon began to count. Meat, lard, flour, salt. If you add sauerkraut to that when spring comes, and berries, and mushrooms, and fish, if you find a river with fish, then that's not just survival, that's life. He asked Ara if she would go with him to the west, to show him the wild boar trails. She said she'd go when her leg allowed it, in a week. Do-yoon nodded. He didn't rush her. Meanwhile, he said about something else. Brine. The blueprint he'd found provided a precise recipe. Water, salt. The ratio is 100 grams of salt per liter of water for a strong brine, 50 grams per liter for a weak one. Strong for long-term storage, weak for flavor. There was just one problem. Salt. The handful So-rin had given him was long gone. Do-yoon had used it sparingly, but it was gone. Salt isn't necessary for smoking. The smoke preserves the food on its own. But for brine, for sausages, for curing, for pasta, you need salt. Lots of salt. Do-yoon went to see the village head. He asked where the village used to get its salt. Pak replied, "Once a year, in the summer, a merchant from the south would come and trade salt for hides. But for the last 3 years, the merchant hasn't come. There were no hides, nothing to trade. The merchant stopped coming." Do-yoon nodded. "So we need to send someone to him, or find the salt ourselves." He recalled the blueprint, the formula for a salt mixture with herbs. One of the ingredients was ash and lye. Ash contains potassium chloride, not sodium chloride. A different kind of salt, bitter. But it works. In small doses, it can be used as a supplement. Do-yoon asked Widow Kim for ash from the hearth. She gave him a bucket. He sifted it, poured water over it, let it settle. He drained it. He boiled it down in a pot over the fire. A white sediment remained at the bottom. Bitter, caustic, potassium, plus a little sodium, plus calcium. A dirty mixture. But it's good enough for emergency curing. Do-yoon mixed the ash salt with the last few grains of real salt. He ended up with a mixture. 100 grams. That's enough for 1 batch of brine. Just one. He salted 10 kilograms of venison. Strong brine. The meat will sit in it for a week. Then out into the open air to dry it out. It'll turn into salted meat. Tough. Salty. Not tasty. But it'll keep for 2 months at 0 degrees. An emergency supply. For a rainy day. Do-yoon put the salted meat in the ice house. separate from the fresh meat. He labeled it. A birch bark tag. Salted meat. Date. Weight. That was normal for him. At the meat processing plant, every batch was labeled. Production date, expiration date, storage temperature. Here, he did the same thing. Pak saw the tags in the ice house. He asked why. Do-yun explained. If you know when you put it in, you know when it'll go bad. If you know the weight, you know how many servings there are. If you know what's in there, you don't have to open it and check every time. Every time you open the door, heat gets in. Every degree of heat means 1 day less of storage time. Pak listened. He nodded. Then he said he'd never thought of food that way, as numbers. Do-yun replied that food is always numbers, grams, degrees, hours, percentages. Those who count eat. Those who don't count go hungry. Pak remained silent, but that evening he approached Do-yun with a proposal. He said he wanted to send Hon south to a merchant with a load of hides, deer, hare, and fox, to trade them for salt. Do-yun agreed, but he added something. Not just hides, smoked meat, 50 slices in a separate bag. Pak was surprised. Why give away food? Do-yun explained. The merchant would try it. He'd realize it wasn't just ordinary dried hare meat. It was a product, consistent, tasty, light, and it kept for weeks. There was nothing like it in the South. The merchant would want more, and next time he'd come himself, not for the hides, for meat. And he'll bring not a handful of salt, but a whole sack, because he'll realize there's something here worth trading. Pak was silent. He thought. Then he nodded. Hong left the next morning, with a sack of hides on his back and 50 slices of smoked venison in a birch bark basket. Do-yun watched him walk away along the trail to the south, a slender figure on the white snow. A 2-week journey, maybe 3, faster if the road is good, slower if there's a blizzard. Do-yun turned toward the forest. In a week, Kang-ah's leg would be well enough for him to head west. In a week, he'd see the wild boar trails. And then, the real work. Kang-ah went hunting and brought back her first catch. Do-yun learned from her about the wild boar trails to the west. He solved the problem of the salt shortage with a temporary ash mixture. He sent Hong south to trade hides and smoked meat in exchange for salt. He set up a system for labeling supplies. Hong left 9 days ago. Kang-ah removed her bandage on the 8th day. Yun-mei examined the wound. It had healed over. It was pink, still tender, but it was holding up. Ada put weight on her leg. She squatted. She stood up. She walked a bit. She limped, but she walked. She said she was ready. Do-yun took Moon and Ada and they headed west. It was the first time Do-yun had gone so far from the village. Ada led the way. She knew every tree, every rock, every ravine. She walked in silence, indicating the direction with a nod of her head. Not a single unnecessary word. Moon followed behind her, watching. He had been hunting for 40 years, but Ada moved through the forest in a way he could not. Silently, her body low, her steps soft. She didn't snap any branches. She didn't sink into the snow as deeply as they did. She read the forest the way Do-yun read a carcass, by scent, by sound, by the movement of the branches. 2 hours later, they emerged onto the western slope. Here the forest was different. Not pine. Mixed. Spruce. Oaks. Hazel. The snow beneath the oaks had been churned up. Wild boars. They'd been digging for acorns. Ada stopped. She pointed out the tracks. Wide, deep. 2 large animals and a few smaller ones. A family. A female with her piglets. And somewhere nearby, a boar. Its tracks were slightly to the side, separate. Boars travel alone. Ada indicated the direction. Until then, Yun had been looking at the tracks, and the system was providing information, though not complete. He didn't touch these animals, didn't hunt them, didn't butcher them. The system highlighted only the general details: direction, approximate weight based on the depth of the tracks, and how long ago they were made. But a golden line appeared, thin and faint, belonging to a wild boar. It ran along the slope to the southwest and faded away after 400 meters. Not enough. He needed a kill for the line to reveal itself. Do-yoon chose a spot for the pit. This was trickier than with deer. A wild boar is heavier, stronger, smarter. The pit had to be deeper, at least 2 meters, and wider. The walls were reinforced with stakes driven in horizontally so the animal couldn't brace itself and jump out. And I needed bait. A deer follows a trail. It doesn't need to be lured. A wild boar searches for food. It will go where it smells something. Until now, Yoon knew what to use as bait. Acorns, rotten ones. The smell of fermentation attracts wild boars. They can smell it from hundreds of meters away. Ara gathered acorns from under the snow, frozen ones. But if you put them in a warm place for 2 days, they'll start to ferment. The scent will spread. They dug until evening. The pit turned out deep, 2 meters 20. The walls were solid, clay. Stakes lined the sides. The floor was made of thick poles. A wild boar is heavy. Thin poles wouldn't support its weight and would collapse too soon. It needs to reach the center. The poles were of medium thickness, sawed down in the middle. They'll break under the weight, but not before the beast is right over the pit. We placed the bait in the center, under the floor. Fermented acorns. The scent carried through the pine needles and snow. We returned in the dark. Ara was limping more badly. Her leg was tired. Yoon Mei met them at the gate. She looked at Ara. Ara turned away. Yoon Mei approached. Silently, she unwound the bandage. She examined it. The wound hadn't reopened, but it had turned red. Yoon Mei applied fresh ointment, birch tar mixed with fat. Ara didn't flinch. She sat there, looking away. Yoon Mei rebandaged it. She stood up. She said one sentence. "Do that one more time, and I'll tie you to a post." Ara didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then Yoon went into the house. Rin was sitting by the hearth. A new pot stood in front of her. It was small, clay. Inside lay cedar nuts, smoked. So Rin looked up. She said she'd found a cedar pine tree by the stream. Last year's cones. The nuts were small, but whole. She'd gathered them and smoked them in the little smokehouse Do-yoon had built for her, all by herself, without any help. Do-yoon took one nut, put it in his mouth. Smoky, oily, slightly sweet. Good. Just the right temperature, just the right time. She'd done it right. He looked at her. So Rin was looking at him, and in her eyes was that very same warmth. Small, but no longer tentative, already steady. She held out the pot. She said it was for him. His. Not for everyone, not for the village. His, just as he'd done for her. Do-yoon took the pot, sat down beside her. They ate the nuts together, in silence. The fire crackled. Snow fell beyond the wall. The 4th month. 3 days later, the boar pit worked. Ara saw the signal at dawn. She ran. Do-yoon and Moon followed her. A boar stood in the pit. A war boar. Old, huge. Do-yoon estimated by eye. 130 kilograms, maybe 140. The beast was furious. It thrashed against the walls. The stakes held firm. The boar couldn't brace itself or push off. Mun whistled through his teeth. Ara drew her bow. Do-yoon stopped her. No, not with an arrow. The arrow would get stuck in the fat and muscle. The boar would go mad with pain and tear the pit apart. Ara looked at him. She waited. Do-yoon took a long pole. He tied a knife to it, tightly, with a rope. It became a spear, rough but long, 2.5 meters. He walked to the edge. The boar below raised its head, small eyes, angry, yellow fangs, curved. Do-yoon waited. The boar turned away. For a second, Do-yoon struck, from top to bottom, at the base of the skull, between the ears, where the spinal cord enters the skull. One swift motion, the boar collapsed. Moon whistled again. Ara lowered her bow. She looked at Do-yoon. Do-yoon wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the beast. His hands were shaking. Not from the effort, from the fact that he had just killed an animal the size of a man. With a makeshift spear, standing on the edge of the pit, he sat down in the snow. He was silent for a moment. Then he stood up. There was no time to waste. It took 6 hours to butcher the boar, the three of them. Ara helped, Moon helped. The hide was thick, stiff. The bristles were coarse. Do-yun peeled it off in large chunks. Under the hide was fat, thick, white. 4 fingers thick on the back, 2 on the sides. Do-yun skimmed off the fat and set it aside. 20 kilograms of pure fat from a single animal. 20 kilograms of calories. At 900 kilocalories per 100 grams, that's 180,000 kilocalories. An adult's daily requirement is 2,000. The fat alone could feed 90 people for one day. The meat, dark, tough. Not like venison, denser, coarse fibers. Not suitable for thin slicing, but perfect for sausage. Do-yu minced the meat, mixed it with the lard. He salted it with an ash mixture. He stuffed it into washed wild boar intestines. He tied it with string every 20 centimeters, 12 links, each weighing 1.5 kilograms. He hung them in the cold chamber of the smokehouse. 3 days of cold smoke. When 3 days later he removed the first link and cut the whole street, stood and watched. The cross-section was pink with white flecks of fat, dense, fragrant. Do-yun cut off a thin slice, put it in his mouth, closed his eyes. Not perfect. Without nitrite, the meat doesn't have the right color or density. Without pepper, there's no heat. Without aging, there's no depth of flavor. But in a world where people ate tree bark, this was more than just food. It was proof. Proof that a single animal could be turned into 100 different things, and each of them was someone's portion. The system recorded 412 units when the sausage went into the mouth of the last resident. Do-yun opened new blueprints, a diagram of a signal tower for monitoring the trails, a blueprint for a smoke generator with fractionation, a recipe for meat concentrate for long-term storage, the design of a rope bridge for crossing a stream. Knowledge unfolded one thing after another, each in its place, each for the next step. Do-yun stood by the smokehouse and looked at the golden map in his mind. The network of trails now covered 5 kilometers around the settlement. Hare trails, deer trails, boar trails, and to the northwest, beyond the limits of visibility, something else. The largest of anything he'd ever seen. A moose. Do-yun knew that a moose was the next level. 300 kilograms of live weight, 150 kilograms of meat. A single moose could feed the entire village for a week. But a moose isn't a hare. A moose won't fall into a pit. A different strategy is needed. Beaters are needed. A team is needed. Kang Ara and her knowledge of the forest are needed. And he needs the people he's trained in butchering, those who know what to do once the beast is brought down. 5 apprentices, Moon, Cho, Hong, when he returns, Gite, and Bom. That's not enough. More are needed. Do-yun turned toward the village. Smoke rose from 2 smokehouses, steady, white, alder-scented. Voices could be heard from the houses. Not quiet, ordinary, human. Someone was laughing. A child. Do-yun didn't know who, but he heard laughter. For the first time since he'd arrived here, he heard a child laughing in the village where, a month ago, children had been chewing on tree bark. Do-yun closed his eyes. He stood there for a moment. Then he opened them and went to work. Hong returned on the 23rd day. He wasn't alone. A man with a mule followed behind him. There were 2 sacks on the mule. Salt, real salt, white, coarse, 20 kilograms in each sack, 40 kilograms of salt. Do-yun stood at the gate and looked at the sacks. 40 kilograms. At a rate of 50 grams per kilogram of meat, that would be enough for 800 kilograms of product. 800 kilograms is 2 months of full-scale operation for 3 smokehouses. The merchant's name was Nam Gon, short, stocky, a weather-beaten face. The merchant's hands, gripping, quick. He looked at Solgok and couldn't believe his eyes. He'd been here 4 years ago. Back then, it was a dump. Mud, hungry shadows instead of people. Now he saw smoke rising from 2 smokehouses, a glacier with a birch bark door, people walking down the street without staggering, children who were running, not sitting against the walls or chewing bark. Namgon tasted the petals that Hong had given him on the road, and he came, not because he believed Hong, but because he had never tasted meat like this before. Tender, dry, smoky, it melts on the tongue. It keeps for weeks without spoiling. In the south, they pay for this with silver. Du Yun welcomed Namgon at the smokehouse, not inside the house, by the smokehouse, on purpose. Let him see it, let him smell it. Namgon stood there, breathing in the alder smoke and looking at the rows of meat in the chamber. Du Yun didn't haggle. He offered a simple deal. Every 2 months, Namgon arrives with salt and iron. He leaves with smoked meat and hides. A fixed exchange. 1 kilogram of salt for 2 kilograms of smoked venison. 1 kilogram of iron for 3 kilograms. Namgon did the math in his head. His eyes gleamed. Down south, 2 kilograms of venison like that are worth 10 times as much as a kilogram of salt. This wasn't a trade, it was a gift. He agreed instantly. Du Yun knew the terms were unfavorable for Solgok. He knew. But he needed salt now, not a fair price later. The first contract is always a loss. The second will break even. The third would turn a profit. Because by the third time, Namgon would no longer be able to do without shipments from Solgok. His customers in the south would get used to smoked venison. They'd get used to it and demand it. And then Du Yun would change the terms. Namgon left 2 days later, with 20 kilograms of smoked meat, with 10 hides, and with the look of a man who had accidentally struck gold. Du Yun watched him go and thought of something else. Iron. Namgon had brought 5 kilograms, a strip, soft, malleable. Hong, the blacksmith's former assistant, looked at it and said he could manage. He needed a forge and an anvil, a forge made of stone and clay, an anvil made from a large, flat boulder. Oak charcoal. Oak burns hot. Du Yun gave the go-ahead. Hong spent 3 days building a smithy, a small one, by the stream. The first things he forged were knives, 3 of them, rough, short, but sharp, made of real iron. Du Yun took one. He tested it on a carcass. The difference from a stone knife was like the difference between a cart and a car. The blade cut through the meat effortlessly. The fascia didn't stretch, it split open. The hide came off twice as fast. Du Yun gave the knives to Moon and Cho. He kept the third one for himself. Then Hong forged some hooks, iron ones, for the smokehouse, instead of birch twigs, which broke every week. Then tips for the stakes in the hunting pits. Then brackets for the ice house. Iron changed everything. Every iron tool cut the work time in half. Less time meant more meat per day. More meat meant more units. More units meant more blueprints. The spiral of growth was unraveling. The 5th month. The first outsiders arrived in Solgok. Not a trader, people. A family from the village of Talmok, 12 kilometers to the south. A man, a woman, 3 children. They came on foot, through the snow, 2 days. The man said he'd heard about Solgok, that there was meat here, that people here didn't go hungry. He didn't ask for anything. He just stood there and watched. The children behind him, skinny, familiar faces, the faces of children who eat tree bark. Yu went out to meet them. He looked at the children. He turned to the village head. Park was standing nearby. His expression was heavy. He understood. Every extra mouth to feed was a drain on the communal supply. Every new family was a risk. But he too saw the children's faces. Du Yun said, "We'll take them in." Park was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. Over the next 3 weeks, 4 more families arrived. From Talmok, from Huangri, from a nameless hamlet in the east. 19 people. Solgo grew to 331 residents. Du Yun reorganized the assignments. Every new man was given a task. Some went into the forest with Moon to set snares. Some went to the construction site with Cho, the 3rd smokehouse. Some went to gather firewood with Bomb. Every woman received work from So Rin, tanning hides, mending clothes, preparing birch bark for kindling. The children went to Yun Mei, checkups, treatment, feeding according to the prescription sheet. So Rin became someone Du Yun hadn't expected. She became the coordinator, quietly, without giving orders, without loud words. She simply knew what everyone needed. The new family from Huangri had no blankets, so Rin took 2 reindeer hides from the stockpile. A woman from Talmach had a backache, so Rin sent her to Yun Mei. The boy from the nameless hamlet had no shoes, so Rin sat down in the evening and sewed some from scraps of boar hide. She did this in silence. Every day, Yun had noticed. One evening he told her. He said that without her, the village wouldn't have managed, that he could hunt an animal and smoke the meat. But he didn't know who needed blankets or whose back was aching, and she knew. So Rin listened. Then she said, "That doesn't matter." He objected. He said that was the most important thing. Meat without distribution is just a pile of meat. Her hands and her eyes turned food into care. So Rin was silent. Then she stood up. She left the house. He heard her through the wall, a single quiet sob. Quick, short, then silence. She returned a minute later. Her eyes were dry. Her back was straight. She sat down by the hearth. She picked up her sewing. The stitches were even. He didn't say a word. There was no need. The 6th month was drawing to a close. 3 smokehouses, 2 ice houses, 20 hair traps, 4 pits for deer and wild boar, a smithy, a trade contract with a southern merchant, 331 residents. Not a single child had died all winter, for the first time in 8 years. The merchant Nam Gon arrived with salt and iron and signed the first trade contract with Solgam. Han built a blacksmith shop and began forging tools. The first settlers from dying villages arrived in the settlement, so Rin became the distribution coordinator. The settlement and lost not a single child that winter. Spring came slowly. The snow didn't melt but settled. It became loose, gray. The stream began to murmur, the ice on it cracked, and water flowed over the surface. The sun grew warm, not hot, but warm. People came out of their homes and stood in the street, turning their faces toward the light. Do Yun stood among them and counted. 9 months. He had been here for 9 months. 312 people had become 331. Not a single one had died. He had done what he had promised himself on the very first day. But this was only the beginning. Spring was changing everything. Animal trails were shifting. Winter routes were closing. Spring routes were opening. Reindeer were moving higher up into the mountains. Wild boars were scattering through the forest. Hares were changing their resting spots. The golden map in Do Yun's mind was being redrawn. The winter lines were fading. The new ones hadn't appeared yet. He needed a new kill to uncover the spring trails, and the first spring kill revealed the scale of the situation. Ara brought back a roe deer, a young female. As he was butchering it, the system provided information that made Do Yun stop in his tracks. The roe deer had come from the south, not from the north, not from the west, from the south, along a trail that hadn't existed in winter. The spring migration. The animals were heading north, across the mountain passes, through the valleys, thousands of them. Deer, roe deer, wild boars, even moose. The animal trail, the very one the elders had spoken of. The great migration that had fed the entire north of Koryo for centuries. It hadn't disappeared. It had shifted. 40 kilometers to the east, through lands that were considered cursed. But they weren't cursed. They were simply far away. And no one went there to check because everyone was too hungry to take the risk. Until Yun saw it on the map. Golden lines from the south merged into a single powerful stream, as wide as a river, bright, pulsating, tens of thousands of tracks, biomass that could feed not just one village, but 10, 100, the entire north. He stood at the edge of the forest and looked at this golden river of life, and he realized that Solgak was not the endpoint. It was the beginning. Do Yun gathered a council for the first time. Pak, Moon, Ara, Yun Mei, Sorin, Hong, Cho. 9 people in the village head's house. Do Yun spoke at length. He explained. The animal trail had shifted, but hadn't disappeared. If they set up a chain of outposts along the new route, they could intercept the migration. Not all of it, just a portion. 10%. That would be enough to feed thousands of people year-round. They needed people. They needed hunters. They needed smokehouses along the route, glaciers, warehouses, roads. Pak listened, his face ashen. He said, "We barely survived the winter, and you want to build outposts 40 kilometers away in those cursed lands?" Do-Yoon replied, saying that it was precisely because they had barely survived. A single Solgok is vulnerable. A blizzard, disease, fire. One blow and everything will collapse. But a network of settlements connected by roads and supply depots will withstand anything. Ara said she knew those lands. She'd been there with her father as a child. There's no curse. There are deep ravines and dense forest, difficult terrain, but passable. Moon said he'd go. Yoon-Mei said she wouldn't go, because someone has to tend to the sick here. But if they build an outpost, she'll need an assistant whom she can train. So Rin remained silent. Then she said one thing. She said that if Do-Yun were to be gone for a long time, she would need the authority to distribute supplies. Park looked at her. He looked at Do-Yun. He nodded. Do-Yun understood. So Rin wasn't asking for power. She was asking for a tool, the keys to the warehouse, so she could feed the people while he was away. He handed her the keys. So Rin took them, clenched them in her palm. That evening, he saw her hang them on a cord and slip it around her neck, under her robe, close to her body. A week later, Do-Young left Solgok. With him were Ara, Moon, Gitae, and 4 men from among the new arrivals. 8 people in all. 10 days' worth of provisions, smoked meat, sausage, flatbreads made from acorn flour that So Rin had learned to bake. They headed east, over the pass, along the trails Ara remembered from her childhood. 3 days' journey. On the 4th day, they reached the spot, a valley between 2 ridges, narrow, long, a stream at the bottom, a forest on the slopes, and tracks everywhere. Thousands of tracks. Deer, wild boar, roe deer, moose. The animal trail ran straight through this valley, just as it had for centuries. Do-Yun stood on the slope and looked down. The golden map blazed in his mind. The lines merged into a solid field of gold. He had never seen so many trails at once. It was like standing on the bank of a river and seeing every fish. Do-Yun chose a spot for the first outpost. On the slope, above the valley, overlooking the trail. This would be the watchtower, a storage shed, a smokehouse, and hunting pits down on the trail. Not many. 3, 5. Enough to catch 2 or 3 animals a week during migration. Do-Young and his men worked for 8 days. They erected the tower, a simple one, a platform on 4 posts, 3 meters high enough to see the valley. They dug 2 pits on the trail. They started stacking stones for the smokehouse. They didn't finish. They ran out of time. They left Gitae and 2 men at the outpost, with a 2-week supply of food and instructions. Do-Yoon explained everything. How to set traps, how to butcher the game, how to smoke the meat, how to store it. Gitae listened intently. He was 15. He already knew how to skin an animal, set snares, and control the draft in the smokehouse. He'd manage. Do-Yoon returned to Solgok 12 days later. So-Rin was standing by the gate. She didn't come out to meet him. She just stood there, waiting. He approached. She looked at him. She didn't say anything. She just stood beside him as he walked toward the house, and that was enough. Spring had opened up new migration routes, and Do-Yun discovered that the animal trail had shifted eastward but hadn't disappeared. He convened the first village council and proposed a plan for expansion. So-Rin was given authority over the distribution supplies. Do-Yun and his group established the first outpost in the valley along the migration route. By the 9th month, 500 people were living in Solgok. By the 12th, 1,200. They arrived in waves, from abandoned settlements, from half-dead villages, from farmsteads where only 3 people remained. The word spread northward like wildfire. There's a place where they feed people. There's a man who knows what he's doing. Do-Yun couldn't manage it alone, and he didn't try. He built a system. Moon became the headhunter. 12 people reported to him. All were trained. All set snares and pits according to his standards. Not as effective as his personal traps, but it worked. 12 hunters brought in as much in a day as Do-yun couldn't have brought in alone in a week. Ara became the leader of the trackers. 6 people, all from hunting clans. All came from abandoned settlements. Ara taught them about the forest. Not butchering, not smoking game. The forest. How to walk, how to listen, how to see tracks that others miss. The trackers worked on the far frontiers. They found new trails, new herds, new migration routes, and they reported to Ara. Ara reported to Do-yun. Do-yun marked new points on the map for pits and ambushes. Yun-mei trained 2 apprentices, girls from among the new arrivals. One from Talmok, the other was from Huanri. Both knew herbs. Yun-mei taught them her method, a prescription sheet for each patient, a meat-based remedy for every symptom: liver, broth, paste, fat. Yun-mei no longer treated patients alone, but she still came to the smokehouse every evening. She and Do-yun would argue for hours, about fermentation, about dosages, about whether it was possible to make an extract from deer tendons to treat joints. So-rin once told him quietly. She said that Yun-mei didn't come just to argue. Do-yun said nothing. He knew. Hong became the blacksmith of Sogok. His smithy had grown. Now there were 2 of them working there, Hong and his apprentice. They forged knives, hooks, arrowheads, staples, and tools for the new smokehouses. 6 smokehouses were in constant operation, 3 in Sogok and 3 at the outposts. Jitai was managing well at the first outpost. The first 2 weeks were tough, then he got the hang of it. He sent meat by wagon train, smoked, labeled, with birch bark tags bearing the date and weight, just as Do-yun had taught him. By the end of the first year, the settlement had changed. It was no longer just a settlement. It had become a town. 1,200 people, 6 smokehouses, 3 ice houses, a hunting tower on the hill, a butchering school where Baum taught the newcomers, a blacksmith's shop, a trading post where Namgon now showed up every month, with salt, with iron, with cloth, with tools, and he'd leave with meat, with sausage, with hides, with bundles of smoked venison that were sold for silver in the south. It was then that Prince Chui's tax collectors arrived, 5 of them, on horseback, in fine armor, with a document from the northern governor. They rode into Solgok and stopped in the middle of the street. The senior collector dismounted. He looked around. He saw the smokehouses, the warehouses, the people. His face showed one thing: surprise. Then it changed to something else: calculation. He demanded to see the village headman. Pak came out. The chief tax collector read the document aloud. A tax. 20% of the entire harvest. Meat, hides, everything produced. To be turned over to the northern governor's treasury. Immediately. Pak stood there in silence. Do-yun stood behind him. Ara stood a little further away, her hand on her bow. Not tense, just resting there. Do-young stepped forward, quietly, without a challenge. He asked the collector if he had seen Solgok's documents. The collector frowned. What documents? Do-young pulled a birch bark scroll from his bosom, unrolled it, showed it to him. It was a register. All the residents of Solgok, names, status, exiles, free settlers, number of mouths to feed, number of sick people, number of children. Next to the register lay a second piece of paper, a calculation of the minimum food supply per capita, signed by village head Pak. And a third document, an official petition to grant the settlement the status of a self-sufficient exile settlement. Under Goryeo law, such a settlement was exempt from taxes for the first 3 years. Before this, Yoon hadn't forged weapons. He forged documents, every evening, after the smokehouse. Rin helped him. Her handwriting was neat, calligraphic. She would copy neatly what he had drafted in rough form. The collector read the papers. His expression changed. He wasn't a fool. He could see that the documents were drafted competently, that the law was quoted correctly, that the village head's seal was where it belonged. Formally, he couldn't take a single gram. Do-yoon added one last thing. He offered the collectors something to eat, something hot. They'd been on the road for 8 days. Through the snow, in the cold. Do-yoon brought a platter out of the smokehouse. Sausage, wild boar, thinly sliced, with bread made from acorn flour, with broth in clay bowls. The collectors ate, silently, greedily. The elder ate more slowly. He looked at Do-yoon over the rim of his bowl. He understood. They weren't feeding him out of generosity. They were feeding him so he would remember the taste and tell the prince. The hunters left 2 days later, without meat, without hides, with full bellies, and with a birch bark box in the elder's saddlebag. A gift. 50 slices of smoked venison for Prince Chue, personally. Do-yoon stood at the gate and watched them leave. Ara approached. She stood beside him. She said they would return, with a large contingent. Do-yoon nodded. He said he knew. He said that by then, Solgok would have something with which to respond. Not swords, not arrows. Warehouses. Full warehouses. You don't go to war with those. Solgok's population had grown to 1,200 residents in its first year. Systems for hunting, education, and trade were well established. Prince Chue's tax collectors arrived, but Do-yoon fended them off with legally sound documents and strategic hospitality. But the threat from the northern governor remained. Winter of the second year came early. Snow fell at the beginning of the 9th month. Do-yoon was ready. 3 ice houses were packed to the brim. 800 kilograms of smoked meat, 200 kilograms of salted meat, 100 kilograms of sausage, 300 kilograms of frozen carcasses in the ice houses. For 1,200 people, this would last 3 months even if not a single trap were to work. But the traps were working. 28 pits, 50 snares, 8 hunting posts along the trails. Mun and his men brought back meat every day. Ara and the trackers monitored the outer borders. The system was working. Not perfectly, but it was working. Do-yoon was preparing a celebration, the first Thaw Festival, a traditional holiday in northern Koryo. It hadn't been celebrated in Solgok for 8 years because there was nothing to celebrate. There's nothing to celebrate when children are dying. Do-yoon announced that there would be a celebration this year. He spent 2 weeks preparing. It wasn't just about handing out food, it was a message to every resident of Solgok, a personal one. Do-yoon remembered everyone. Not all 1,200 by name, but the key ones, the sick, the elderly, children, those who arrived first, those who arrived last. He set the table on long planks stretching the entire length of the street, 320 dishes, all from a single reindeer, tongue in juniper brine. For Yoon Mei, she loved juniper. The thinnest salami made from trimmings. For Moon, he appreciated simplicity. Bone broth as thick as jelly. For old man Yun Suk, he had almost no teeth left. Crispy bits of roasted hide. For Gite, the boy loved crunchy things. Smoked ribs and honey. For So Na, she was still afraid of meat on the bone. Honey softened her fear, made the taste sweet, childlike, safe. Thinly sliced, tender pastrami. For Village Head Park, he'd lost 2 of his back teeth over the winter. He couldn't handle anything tough. Liver pate with herbs. For Grandma Kim, she was blind. She could only taste and smell. The pate was rich, thick, fragrant, smoked lard with garlic. For Han, the blacksmith burned more calories than anyone else. He needed fat. 312 original residents, plus over 800 who arrived later. And for each person Do-yoon knew personally, there was a separate portion, with a birch bark tag. Name, dish, reason for the choice. For blind Grandma Kim, spicy, so she could feel it. For Cho, the orphan who's afraid of meat, sweet, with honey. For Han, the blacksmith, fatty, for strength. To healer Yoon Mei, juniper, for her spirits. People approached the table, found their name, took their portion, and remained silent, not out of surprise, but because whoever had thought of them individually, not about the village, not about the supplies, about them personally, to each their own. Sona stood over her portion and cried, quietly, slowly, honey-glazed ribs in her hands. She wasn't crying from hunger. She had been eating every day for a year now. She was crying because her name was on the birch bark tablet, and next to it were the words, "For Sona, with sweet," because she deserved it. It was on this very day that Cho De-hee arrived in Solgok, the eldest daughter of Prince Che. An inspection. Her father had sent her to check what kind of miracles were taking place in the exile settlement. She arrived on horseback, with 2 guards, in traveling clothes, not in silk, in leather and fur. A northern aristocrat, a hunter since childhood. She dismounted at the gate and saw the table, long, stretching the entire length of the street. 1,000 people were eating. Each serving had a name tag. She walked along the table, read the tags, stopped, read on. Then she found Do-yoon. He was standing by the smokehouse, cutting meat for the latecomers. She approached. She introduced herself. Her voice was even, cold, formal. She said she had come on her father's behalf, that an explanation was needed. Where had the meat for 1,000 people come from in this exile settlement? Do-yoon looked at her. He wiped his hands on his apron. He said the explanation was simple. He knows how, and he does it. De-hee didn't smile. She said she wanted to see the process, from start to finish. Do-yoon nodded. Tomorrow, in the morning. The next morning, he took her into the woods, to a pit. A deer stood there, fresh, hunted during the night. Do-yoon killed it, quickly, one blow, clean. Then he began to butcher it, right there in the woods, on the snow. De-hee stood and watched. Do-yoon explained each step, quietly, calmly, like a lecturer. Here's the fascia. The knife goes along it, not across it. Here's the liver. Remove it carefully. Don't damage the gallbladder, or the bitterness will seep into the meat. Here's the tendon, strong. Threads are made from it. Stitches are made from threads. Clothes are made from stitches. An hour later, he handed her the knife. She looked at the knife, then at him. She took it. Her hands were gloved. He told her to take off her gloves. You need to feel the meat with your fingers. She took them off. Her hands were white, well manicured, aristocratic. She began to cut, clumsily but confidently. She'd been hunting her whole life, shooting, finishing off her prey. But she'd never butchered an animal herself. That was the servant's job. Do-yoon stood beside her and corrected her, quietly, patiently. The angle of the knife, the direction of the cut, the pressure. 2 hours later, Cho De-hee's hands were covered in blood up to her elbows. Her face was smudged with soot from the fire by which they warmed themselves between cuts. Her hairstyle had come undone. Her hair fell onto her shoulders. And she laughed. Not an aristocratic laugh, a real one, loud, with her head thrown back. She was laughing because, for the first time in her life, she had made something with her own hands from start to finish. And it wasn't embroidery or calligraphy or playing the flute. It was real. Do-yoon looked at her and thought, this is how you win over a princess. Not with gold, not with words, with work. A week later, he made her a knife. Not a gift, a working knife, made of iron, with a handle of deer antler. With her name on the tang, Hong forged the blade. Do-yoon assembled it, himself. De-hee took the knife, turned it over in her hands, tested its balance. She looked at her name on the tang, then at Do-yoon. She didn't say anything, but she didn't leave. She ordered the guards to return to her father with a report. She stayed behind, for another week, then another month. By the end of the first year, she was in Solgok and had no intention of leaving. The Sun Clan's punitive force arrived at the beginning of the second year. 120 soldiers, commander Sun Jong-min, the second son of the capital's clan. 38 years old, tall, thin, a calm face, intelligent eyes. He was no fool, nor was he a villain. He was a man of the system. The capital had spoken. The exile settlement had spiraled out of control. There were reports of sorcery being performed on beasts, heretical practices, a threat to order. Bring them to heel. Sun Jong-min had been traveling for 2 weeks along winter roads. His soldiers hadn't had anything hot to eat for 8 days. Their last stop with decent food had been in the town of Chungwon, beyond the pass. Since then, nothing but hardtack and frozen porridge. The soldiers were angry, cold, hungry. They entered Solgok at dawn. They expected to see a miserable hole with a handful of ragged people. They saw something else. 20 smokehouses were billowing smoke at once. 3 ice houses, a blacksmith shop, a hunting tower on the hill. 1,200 people who weren't hiding. They stood in the street, watching, silently, without weapons in their hands, but without fear in their eyes. Sun Jong-min dismounted. He looked around. His face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes moved quickly, counting. The smokehouses, the warehouses, the people, the tower. He saw organization, not a crowd, a structure. Do-yoon came out to meet him, alone, unarmed, without guards, wearing a work apron. His hands were covered in salt. He had been butchering a carcass when the squad entered. He didn't stop working. He finished, wiped his hands, stepped out. Do-young bowed. Exactly as much as protocol required, no less. He said he knew who was standing before him. He said he knew why he had come. And he said one thing. He said that Song Jong-min's soldiers hadn't eaten a hot meal in 8 days, that he had 3 metric tons of smoked venison in his warehouse, and that he proposed feeding the soldiers first, and then discussing everything else. Song Jong-min looked at him. 10 seconds, 20. Then he nodded. It wasn't out of kindness. Hungry soldiers in a foreign village, surrounded by the smell of food. Hard to control. They might start looting or mutiny. Feeding them meant bringing them under control. Song Jong-min understood that. Do-yoon brought out the food. Not just a few bites, not sausage, a full meal. Hot broth, ribs grilled over coals, porridge made from acorn flour with fat, thinly sliced smoked venison. The soldiers ate, in silence. At first, quickly, greedily, then slowly, then quietly. 120 men sat on the ground, eating and remaining silent. Some closed their eyes. Some held their bowls of broth with both hands and simply breathed in the steam. One young soldier, just a boy, about 17, raised his head and looked at Do-yoon. Tears welled up in his eyes. He wasn't crying. His eyes were just shining. He said quietly, "Thank you." Do-yoon nodded and walked away. While the soldiers ate, Ara went about her business. 30 trackers, silently, in position. All the high ground around Solgok, all the trails, all the exits, archers on the tower, archers on the warehouse roofs, archers behind the trees. No one saw them, no one heard them, but by the end of lunch, Solgok was a fortress. Sun Jong-min saw it. He stood up from the table, walked down the street, looked at the tower, looked at the roofs, looked at the forest. He didn't see the archers, but he sensed them. He was a soldier, 20 years. He knew when someone was watching him from an ambush. He returned to Do-yoon, sat down across from him, was silent for a moment, then he spoke. He said he had come to investigate witchcraft, that he had the authority to arrest and seize property, that his powers were sealed with the Ministry of Right's seal. Do-yoon listened, then he replied. He said there was no witchcraft, there was knowledge. He showed him the smokehouses. He explained the principle: cold smoke, temperature control, fermentation. He showed him the ice houses. He showed him the traps. He showed him the ledgers and documents. Every gram of meat in Solgok had been counted and recorded. Sun Jong-min listened. His face was stony. Then he asked a question. He asked how an exiled clerk knew all this. Do-yoon paused. Then he told the truth. Not all of it, just part of it. He said that in his youth he had read treatises by foreign masters, that he had traveled through southern lands, and that he had spent his entire life studying one thing: how to preserve meat. Song Jong-min looked at him for a long time. Then he said he didn't believe it, but he added that it didn't matter. Something else was important. He saw 1,200 well-fed people. He saw 20 smokehouses. He saw 3 months' worth of supplies. He saw a level of organization that didn't exist in any city in the northern province. And he sees 30 archers in positions his soldiers hadn't noticed. Du Yun didn't flinch. Sun Jong-min stood up. He walked over to the window. He looked out onto the street. His soldiers were sitting there, well-fed and relaxed. Their weapons were stacked against the wall. Some were asleep. He turned to Du Yong and said, "My men won't raise their weapons against those who have fed them. You knew that." Du Yong nodded. Song Jong-min paused. Then he said one more thing. He said that in the capital, they think the north is a barren land, frozen, useless, that people are exiled here to die. And this, he said, sweeping his arm around, changes everything. Because if the north can feed itself, then the north doesn't need the capital. And the capital understands that. That's exactly why they sent him. Not for sorcery, for control. Do Yun replied. He said he didn't want war with the capital. He didn't want independence. He didn't want the throne. He wanted only one thing, that not a single child in the north of Goryeo would ever have to eat tree bark again. Sun Jong-min looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "I'll write in my report that no sorcery was found, that the settlement operates within the law, that I recommend granting it the status of a border autonomy." He stood up. He held out his hand. Do Yun shook it. The handshake was firm, dry, businesslike, not friendship, recognition. The detachment left 3 days later, with full bellies, with birch bark boxes in their saddlebags, gifts for the commanders in the capital, smoked venison, sausage, petals. Let them try it. Let them know what the north produces. Sun Jong-min was the last to leave. He stopped at the gate, turned around in the saddle, looked at Du Yun, said, "They'll send others." Then he turned around and rode off. Du Yun stood at the gate. Everyone stood nearby. So Rin was on his left. She was holding his sleeve, not his hand, but his sleeve, quietly, unobtrusively. Yun Mei was on his right. She was muttering something about how the soldiers had used up a month's worth of fat reserves and that she would personally deduct it from his rations. Ara stood slightly ahead, bow on her back, eyes on the road. She didn't relax until the last rider had disappeared around the bend. Then she lowered her shoulders. She turned to Du Yun. She nodded. Once. Chui Dai-hee stood to the side, a knife at her belt, her own, with her name on the handle. She'd heard everything. She knew her father would receive the report, and that he wouldn't be pleased. She knew she would have to choose, between the clan and this place, between her father and the man who had given her the knife and taught her how to cut meat. She had already made her choice. She just hadn't said it out loud yet. So Na stood behind everyone else. She clutched a set of keys to her chest, the keys to the main warehouse. Du Yun had given them to her a month ago, not to So Rin. So Rin managed the distribution. But the keys were a symbol, a sign of trust. He'd told her back then, "Now this is your warehouse. You decide who gets how much." So Na held the keys as if they were a baby bird, carefully, tightly, as if they might fly away. She was 10 years old. In a year, she would become a senior student at the butchering academy. In 2 years, she'd have the best nose in Solgok. But right now she was 10, and she held the keys, standing among the people who had become her family. Du Yun climbed the hunting tower, the highest point in Solgok. You can see everything from here. The smokehouses, 20 columns of smoke, the glaciers, warehouses, the blacksmith shop, houses, new ones, old ones, repaired ones, people below. 1,200. No, more than that now. Since yesterday, 3 more families had arrived from the south. 1,214 more. Du Yun closed his eyes. The golden map in his mind unfolded to its full extent. A network of trails stretched beyond the horizon. To the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. Hare trails, deer trails, boar trails, moose trails. New trails he hadn't seen yet pulsed at the edge. There were more animals there, more trails, more food. For thousands of people, for tens of thousands. All 6 of them stood nearby. So Rin was holding on to his sleeve. Yun Mei was arguing with someone below. Her voice drifted up from below through the creaking of the wood. Ara gazed silently toward the north, toward the lands beyond the ridges that were yet to be discovered. Cho Dae-hee stood by the railing. The wind ruffled her hair. Her hands were on her belt. A knife was on her hip. So Na sat on the step below. Keys jingled around her neck with every movement. Smoke rose from below, white, alder, pure. 20 smokehouses were working at once. The scent wafted throughout the village, throughout the valley, throughout the gorge. The scent of food, the scent of life. Do-yoon listened. Below, silence. Not dead, not hungry, satisfied. 1,200 people and 14 more. Not a single one of them was crying from hunger. Not a single child was chewing on bark. Not a single mother was counting the days until spring, wondering if her son would live to see it. That was what it was all for. Not glory, not the system, not the golden lines on the map. Silence. The sated silence of a village where no one dies. Do-yoon opened his eyes. He looked toward the horizon. Somewhere down south, the capital was hatching intrigues. Somewhere to the west, Prince Cho was reading his daughter's report and clenching his fists. Somewhere to the east, the beast trail was carrying thousands of beasts across the mountain passes. And somewhere, deep within the ridge of 1,000 wolves, the spirits that had summoned him from another world were watching him and waiting. They would yet demand their payment, he knew. But that would come later. Right now, the smokehouses were billowing smoke below. Right now, the people were well fed. Right now, a child was laughing in the house at the end of the street. So Rin tugged at his sleeve. He turned to her. She was looking at him. Her eyes were dark, warm. There was no longer any emptiness in them, nor fear, nor the question of who he was. She knew who he was. Her man. The one who asks for her opinion. The one who shares his last bite with her. The one who built her a little smokehouse so she could have a place of her own. Do-yoon placed his hand on hers, so Rin didn't pull her hand away. She clasped his fingers, tightly. They were standing on the tower, 6 of them plus 1, above the settlement that in half a year would become a town. In a year, a city. In 2 years, the capital of the north. But all that was later, right now. Do-yoon said quietly, without opening his eyes, "Well, there you go. Now we can really get started." So Rin squeezed his fingers even tighter. Below, the smokehouses were billowing smoke. Snow lay on the rooftops. A child was laughing, and the silence was deep and full.